Nobody walks 14 miles through a blizzard. The soldier laughed in her face. Then he checked the radio, dead. 3 channels gone. Exactly like she said. His laugh died in his throat. She was 18. Frozen jacket, worn out boots, no ID, no weapon. She had just walked through a storm that grounded military helicopters and killed 2 rescue teams. And the first words out of her mouth weren't "help me." They were "give me a gun." They laughed at her. Until the general saw the symbol burned into her arm, and every person in that room stopped breathing. Subscribe now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The gate guard's name was Private Danny Kowalski, and he had been standing in minus 20-degree wind for 6 hours when he first saw her. She came out of the blizzard like something that had no business being alive. No vehicle, no escort, no radio, no gear. Just a girl young, maybe 17 or 18, walking through a storm that had already killed 2 rescue teams earlier that week. The snow was up past her knees in places, and she was moving through it like she was walking across a parking lot in July. Kowalski blinked. He thought he was hallucinating. He'd heard stories about hypothermia doing strange things to a person's mind, and for a second he genuinely believed he was the one in trouble. He nudged his partner, Private Leo Briggs, and pointed. Briggs looked, then looked again. What in the world? They both watched her approach. She wore a jacket that was built for autumn, not a military blizzard. Old boots, the kind you'd find at a Goodwill. No hat, no gloves. Her dark hair was half frozen against the side of her face, and she didn't seem to care. She moved with this strange, quiet steadiness that didn't match anything Kowalski had ever seen in a civilian. Most civilians who stumbled toward a military gate in bad weather came in as stumbling, panicked arms waving, screaming that they needed help. Some came in crying, some came in barely breathing. This girl walked straight. She walked like she had a destination, and she had already decided she was going to reach it. When she got within 15 feet of the gate, Kowalski raised his rifle. Standard procedure. Unidentified individual approaching a restricted military installation. Stop right there, he shouted over the wind. This is a restricted area. Identify yourself. She stopped. She looked at him, not at the rifle, at him, like she was reading something on his face. Then she looked at Briggs. Same thing. Quiet, calm, like she was doing a quick inventory and didn't find anything worth being afraid of. Kowalski kept his voice hard. I said identify yourself. Who are you? Where did you come from? Do you have any ID on you? She reached into her jacket pocket, slowly, very deliberately, keeping her movements visible. And Kowalski felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Not because he was scared of her, because the way she moved was intentional, practiced, like someone who had been in situations where the wrong move meant someone pulled a trigger. She pulled out nothing. Her hand came out empty. No ID, she said. Her voice was steady, no shaking, no chattering teeth. After walking through that storm for God knows how long, she was standing there, speaking in a completely level voice. Kowalski tightened his grip on the rifle. How did you get here? Where did you come from? On foot, she said, from the Eastern Ridge. Briggs made a sound that was almost a laugh. The Eastern Ridge, that's 14 miles in a whiteout. Nobody walks 14 miles through this storm. I did, she said simply. Without gear, without a radio, without... I need to speak to the commanding officer, she said. Not I need help, not please let me in, I'm freezing. Not any of the things a normal person would say. I need to speak to the commanding officer. Kowalski lowered his rifle just slightly, not because he was any less alert, but because he was genuinely thrown off. Young lady, I don't know who you are or what you think is happening here, but you don't just walk up to a military gate in the middle of a blizzard and start making demands. You need to... Give me a gun, she said. There was a single beat of absolute silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then Kowalski and Briggs looked at each other, and they laughed. They laughed hard, the kind of laugh that comes out of pure shock and disbelief. Briggs actually bent at the waist a little. Kowalski shook his head and laughed until his eyes watered, which was easy to do in that cold. Briggs started, then laughed again. Did you just ask us to? There are armed men moving through the eastern corridor of this base, the girl said. Her voice hadn't changed. She wasn't angry that they were laughing. She wasn't embarrassed. She was just stating facts like someone reporting weather data. They came through the maintenance tunnels on the north side. They disabled your outer sensor grid 12 minutes ago. If you check your radio right now, you'll find that 3 of your communication channels already dead. The laughter stopped. Briggs reached for his radio immediately, clicked through the channels. Dead. Dead. Interference. Dead. His face went from amused to something much more complicated. How did you know that? Kowalski asked. Because I've seen these people work before, she said. And because the same thing happened to a facility in Norway 3 years ago, and a station in Alaska 4 years before that. They're not here to destroy anything. They're here to steal something specific. And if your commanding officer doesn't know what they're looking for, he's not going to know where to protect. Kowalski stared at her. What's your name? He said quietly. She looked at him for a moment. Cora, she said. Cora Vane. Inside the command center, General Marcus Whitaker was already having the worst night of his career. The storm alone had been a logistical nightmare. The base was supposed to rotate a new security team in 3 days ago, but the weather had grounded everything. His own helicopter was buried under 4 feet of snow. 2 of his senior communications officers were in the medical ward with frostbite. The heating in Section C had gone out entirely, and then they were running on emergency generators. And now Kowalski was on the radio telling him there was a teenage girl at the gate demanding to speak to someone in charge. Whitaker rubbed his face. Kowalski, I don't have time for... Sir, she knew about the communication channels. She told us before Briggs checked. 3 of them are dead, sir, she knew. Whitaker stopped moving. Say that again. She said men came through the maintenance tunnels. She said the sensor grid on the north perimeter is disabled. Sir, I checked. She's right. Captain Rodriguez confirmed it 2 minutes ago. Something tripped the backup sensors near quarter 7. Whitaker was already moving toward the security monitors. He pulled up the camera feed at the gate. He saw her, standing between 2 armed soldiers. This slight young woman with frozen hair and a jacket that wasn't built for this weather, and she was standing there with her arms loose at her sides, looking around the compound like she was memorizing it. There was something about the way she stood. He'd spent 30 years around soldiers. He knew what it looked like when someone was truly alert versus when someone was just scared. This girl wasn't scared. She was operational. She was reading the environment the same way a trained field operative would. Bring her in, Whitaker said, and do it carefully. Carefully, sir. She's just a... Carefully private, Whitaker said. Do it now. They brought Cora Vane into interrogation room 3, which was the warmest room in the base and also the most secure. She sat down across from Whitaker and 2 of his senior officers, Lieutenant Colonel Hess and Captain Rodriguez, and she looked around the room once slowly and then folded her hands on the table. Whitaker watched her do it. He watched her clock the camera in the upper right corner. The emergency exit behind him. The position of both officers, the ventilation panel above Rodriguez's head. She did all of it in about 4 seconds, and then she just sat there, composed, waiting. Whitaker leaned forward. Let's start with the basics. Who are you? Cora Vane, 18 years old. Where are you from? Cora Vane, 18. Officially nowhere. Technically, I was assigned a residential code in Montana until I was 15. After that, I was moved a lot. Moved by who? A beat. I think you already know the answer to that, General. Whitaker kept his face still. Humor me. The same people who built the facility under grid reference 71 Alpha that your military officially has no record of, she said. The same people who ran a program that your government spent considerable effort pretending never existed. The program whose symbol is burned into my arm. Hess shifted in his seat. Rodriguez's pen had stopped moving. Whitaker said nothing. Cora reached across the table slowly and pushed back the left sleeve of her jacket. There, just above her wrist, burned into her skin, not tattooed burned, was a symbol. A black mark shaped like a curved claw. 3 lines splaying outward from a central hook. The room went very quiet. Whitaker had seen that symbol exactly 4 times in his life. Once in a classified briefing that he wasn't supposed to have attended. Once in a document that was officially destroyed the same week he read it. Once on the arm of a woman who had briefed him in a parking garage at 2 in the morning and told him things that kept him awake for a year. And once in a photograph he still kept locked in his personal safe. A photograph of Clara Vane. He looked at the girl across the table. Really looked at her. The set of her jaw. The way her eyes held steady even when she was reading him. The patience. Black Talon, he said quietly. She didn't blink. Yes, that program was terminated. No, she said, it was hidden. There's a difference. And the people who are moving through this base right now are here because someone wants to unbury it. Hess leaned forward. How do you know about this? What's your connection to Black Talon who sent you here? Nobody sent me, she said. I came on my own. Through a 14-mile blizzard, Rodriguez said flatly. Alone, with no gear, at 18 years old. Correct. Why? Because the people coming through your maintenance tunnels are going to find the original Black Talon research files that your base has been sitting on for the last 22 years without anyone bothering to tell you what they actually are, Cora said. And if they extract that research, they won't need a government to rebuild the program. They can do it privately, quietly, and the children they'll use won't ever have anyone come looking for them. Hess started to say something dismissive. Whitaker held up his hand and Hess stopped. Because Whitaker's chest had done something strange just now. How do you know we have those files, he said carefully. Because my mother put them here, Cora said, before she died. The silence in that room was different after she said that, heavier. Whitaker looked at the symbol on her arm, looked at her face, looked at the stillness behind her eyes that wasn't cold and wasn't hard. It was something else, something that looked like a person who had decided a very long time ago that falling apart wasn't an option. Your mother, he said quietly. Clara Vane. Cora's jaw tightened, just slightly, the first real crack in that composure. But she held it. Yes, she said. Whitaker sat back in his chair. Dean had known Clara Vane. Not well, no one knew Clara Vane well because she hadn't allowed it. But he had worked alongside her for 6 months during an operation that he still wasn't authorized to name. He had seen her do things in the field that defied ordinary explanation. She was the most precisely controlled human being he had ever met. And looking at this girl, this half-frozen teenager, who had walked 14 miles through a blizzard and sat down across from 3 officers without a single tremor in her voice, he was looking at Clara Vane's daughter. He reached up and pressed his comm unit. Rodriguez, I need a full sensor sweep of the north perimeter tunnels. Now, and get me Sergeant Holt. Rodriguez was already moving. Then the lights flickered and the base alarm activated. Not the weather alarm, the breach alarm. It was a sound Whitaker hadn't heard in a real emergency in 8 years, and every person in that room felt it in their bones. Cora stood up immediately. She didn't panic. She didn't look confused. She stood up and turned toward the door and said, North corridor first. They'll try to draw your people toward the east. Don't follow the diversion. Sit down, Hess snapped. You're a civilian and a minor, and you're going to stay in this room until 12 minutes, Cora said. Right? She wasn't talking to Hess. She was talking to Whitaker. That's how long it took them to breach the facility in Alaska before anyone understood what was actually happening. Your archive is on the lower level, sub-level, 3 filing block, 7 through 12. How long does it take your people to reach sub-level 3 from the main corridor? Whitaker said nothing. 8 minutes, she answered herself, which means you have 4 minutes to make a decision. Hess said, General, we cannot take tactical guidance from a teenager who walked out of a blizzard with no identification. This is insane. We have protocols. Your protocols didn't tell you the sensor grid was down, Cora said, still looking at Whitaker. Your protocols didn't tell you they were already inside the tunnel network. Your protocols are 12 minutes behind. She paused. I'm not. Whitaker looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he made a decision that he knew was going to be either the smartest or stupidest thing he had done in 30 years of service. Give her a sidearm, he said. The room went completely still. Hess looked like someone had suggested handing a live grenade to a child. Sir, you heard me, Colonel. Whitaker was already moving. And somebody get her some real boots. Those ones are going to get her killed. Kowalski, standing just outside the door, looked down at Cora's worn-out boots and back up at her face. She was looking straight ahead. Calm, ready. Don't take this the wrong way, he said quietly, but about 20 minutes ago I was laughing at you. I know, she said. I shouldn't have done that. She looked at him then, just briefly. Something passed across her face that was complicated and human and impossible to fully read. No, she said quietly, you shouldn't have. But I'm used to it. That landed on him harder than he expected. He handed her the sidearm without another word. She checked the chamber the way you check a chamber when handling a weapon has been part of your daily existence since you were old enough to understand what danger meant. Clean practice, no hesitation. The East Corridor diversion, she said. Where's your secondary response team position right now? Kowalski pulled up his radio. They're moving east. Sergeant Holt just redirected them. Call them back, Cora said, before they lose another 4 minutes. The base was chaos in a very controlled way. Military chaos has a particular texture. It's not the wild noise of civilian panic, but a concentrated, rapid, serious movement of people who know exactly what their jobs are, but are moving faster than they want to. Boots on concrete floors, radio traffic cutting in and out, the distant sound of something hitting the outer hull of the building. Cora moved through it differently. She moved the way water moves through a system of pipes. She found the path of least resistance, and she took it and she moved with a speed that didn't look like rushing. She was reading the base as she went. She remembered things from information she'd gathered long before she ever walked through that gate. Floor plans her mother had described to her, access points, structural weaknesses. But she was also riding the current moment. The way the air pressure changed near certain doorways. The direction of the draft that meant a tunnel entrance was open somewhere ahead. The position of the guards and what their body language said about where they thought the threat was. General Whitaker stayed close to her and hated himself a little for following an 18-year-old girl through his own base. But he watched the way she moved and he kept his mouth shut. Hess hadn't come. He'd stayed in the command center, which was where Whitaker needed him anyway. Rodriguez was with them 3 steps back, rifle up. There, Cora said quietly. She stopped at a junction between Corridor 7 and the stairwell access to Sublevel 2. She was looking at a ventilation panel near the ceiling. What? Rodriguez whispered. Someone came through there recently, she said. The dust pattern on the lower edge is broken, and look at the corner joint. It's been reclosed, but not latched. Rodriguez looked. He'd walked past that panel 6 times in the last year and never noticed a thing about it. How many? Whitaker asked. At least 2, maybe 3. They're already below us. Cora looked at the stairwell door. They know where the files are. They'll be efficient. They won't be carrying anything unnecessary. They want the data core, not paper records. The data core is a hardened drive in a locked housing in filing block 11, Whitaker said. They'd need specific access tools to extract it. Cora looked at him steadily. And you're wondering whether they have them? He was. Yes, she said, they do. How do you know? Because the same people who trained me to understand those systems are the same people who train whoever is down there, she said. We learned the same things. We were taught by the same instructors. The only difference is that I left. A pause. They didn't. Whitaker absorbed that. You know these people, he said. Not a question. Some of them, she said, personally. And you still came here, knowing they might be here. She looked at him with those quiet, steady eyes that he was starting to understand weren't empty. They were full of something that had been built over a long time under enormous pressure. Especially because of that, she said. They moved to the stairwell. Rodriguez held the door. Whitaker went through. Cora followed, and she was already pulling the sidearm up in a 2-handed grip that was completely textbook and completely natural and completely inconsistent with the image of the exhausted teenager who had appeared at the gate an hour ago. Sublevel 2 was dim. Emergency lighting only long yellow strips along the base of the walls. Their footsteps were the loudest thing in the corridor. Cora held up her fist. They stopped. She stood there for 5 seconds without moving. What is it? Rodriguez breathed. Someone just stopped moving, she said. Listen. He listened. He didn't hear anything. He was about to say so. Then he heard the absolute absence of sound that she had heard first. The quality of silence that comes from a person actively holding their breath somewhere very close. Cora took 2 quick sideways steps to the right, placing herself flat against the wall, and pulled Rodriguez with her by his vest a half-second before a figure came around the corner low and fast. The figure, dressed in black, masked, moving with trained precision, came through the space where they had been standing. Cora moved before Rodriguez had time to process what was happening. She stepped into the attacker's momentum. Instead of away from it, got one hand on the weapon arm, torqued it downward and sideways in a motion that used the attacker's own forward movement against him, and the man hit the floor hard and stayed there. It took maybe 2 seconds. Rodriguez had his rifle up. He was breathing fast. Whitaker was very still. The man on the floor made one attempt to get up, and Cora was already crouching over him with the sidearm at a very specific angle that communicated She had thought about this longer than he had. Don't, she said quietly. He didn't. How many more, she asked. The man said nothing. I know you're trained to resist questioning, Cora said. I know exactly what they taught you about information security, about holding position, about protecting the mission. I know because I learned the same things, but what they didn't teach you is how this ends. She paused. How many more? A long silence. 2, the man finally said, already at the archive. Cora stood up and looked at Whitaker. 2 minutes, she said, maybe less. They ran. The archive room door was supposed to be locked. It wasn't anymore. Someone had burned through the electronic locking mechanism cleanly and quietly, and the door was standing open by 3 inches, and light was coming through from inside. Cora stopped them outside the door. She held up 2 fingers, pointed, moved her hand in a slow arc to indicate spacing. 2 people, separated, positioned to cover the room. She knew this because this was exactly how she would position them. She knew this because she had been trained by the same system. She knew this because the person who had designed the infiltration of this facility had thought the way she thought, moved the way she moved, and had learned to do both from the same source. And she knew who that person was. She had known since she first heard the description of what was happening. The efficiency, the tunnel approach, the communication blackout, the timing, the specific target. She knew who this was. Whitaker touched her arm. On 3, he mouthed. She shook her head, held up 1 finger. Wait. She was listening to the movement inside, the sound of equipment, the click of a mechanism, the specific pace of someone working under time pressure, but with training. She had heard those sounds before. She had heard them in training rooms and testing facilities, and in 100 drills that had been designed to push children past what children were supposed to be able to endure. She had heard them from the person on the other side of that door. Cora pushed the door open and walked through. There were 2 figures inside. Both turned immediately, both moved toward cover. Immediately, both brought weapons up with the speed and precision of people who had been doing exactly this since they were very young, and then one of them stopped. He stopped because he recognized her. He stopped because, under the mask and the tactical gear and the years of separation, Cora Vane was not someone he had ever expected to see standing in this room. And she looked at him and said his name. Ethan. The word landed in the room like something physical. The second figure, a woman late 20s mask, didn't stop. She kept her weapon up and her eyes on Whitaker and Rodriguez. But Ethan Decker didn't move. He stood there with his weapon halfway up and his eyes on Cora, and something complicated moved across the part of his face she could see above the mask. You shouldn't be here, he said. His voice was low, careful. I know, she said. Neither should you. Cora. He said her name the way you say the name of someone you haven't spoken to in years, but have thought about constantly. I thought you were gone. I was, she said. I came back. Why, he was genuinely asking. Under all the training and the mission and the years of whatever had been done to both of them, he was genuinely asking. Why would you come back to any of this? She looked at him. Because of what's in those files, she said. Because of what they're going to do with them if you take them out of here. Because there are children, Ethan. There are children in facilities right now who are going through what we went through. And if those files go to the people who sent you there, will be more of them. A long silence. You know what we are, Ethan said quietly. You know what they made us. I know what they tried to make us, Cora said. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? No, she said. It's not, because I'm standing here, and I chose to be here. And they never gave us choices, Ethan. Remember, they were very specific about that. No choices, no alternatives, no future except the one they designed for us. She paused. I rejected that. I'm asking you to do the same thing. The woman with the weapon was watching Ethan now, watching something change in his posture. The mission, she started. Stand down, Ethan said. The woman stiffened. Decker. Stand down. Firmer now, a very long moment. Then slowly, with clear reluctance, the woman lowered her weapon 2 inches. Not all the way, but enough. Ethan looked at Cora across the room, and in his eyes, behind the years, in the training, and whatever had been done to him in the time since she'd last seen him, there was something that looked like recognition. The kind of recognition that happens when 2 people have survived the same thing and they see that in each other's face. There's no going back from this, he said quietly. I know, Cora said. They'll come after me. I know. And you're asking me to trust. I'm asking you to choose, she said, for the first time, something they never let us do. The archive room hummed with the sound of cooling systems. Ethan Decker stood very still, and then he lowered his weapon. The woman behind him made a sound. Rodriguez already had her covered. Whitaker was moving toward the data core housing, but Cora was watching Ethan, and Ethan was watching her. The people who sent me, he said, they have a second team, an extraction crew. They're positioned outside east of the base waiting for the signal. Waiting for you to bring out the data core, Cora said. Yes. Where's the signal device? He reached into his vest slowly, pulled out a small black transmitter, held it out to her. She took it. And the second team, how many of four, he said, but they'll pull back the moment they realize the signal isn't coming. They're not here to fight. They're here to receive. Cora turned and held out the transmitter to Whitaker. I took it without a word. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were moving between her and the man across the room with an expression that Cora recognized he was trying to understand what he was looking at. What he was looking at was two people who had been raised as weapons standing in the same room at the end of the same mission, and one of them had just chosen something different. General, Cora said, your north perimeter team should circle east before the extraction crew identifies the situation and moves. You have about 7 minutes. Whitaker was already on his radio. Cora stood in the middle of the archive room and felt the weight of the last several hours settle into her bones. The 14 miles, the cold, the interrogation room, the corridor fight. This room, Ethan's face, she was very tired. But she was also, in a way, she hadn't felt in a long time exactly where she was supposed to be. Ethan was secured. The second team was intercepted at the eastern perimeter before they had time to organize a response. The man from Quarter 7 was in custody. The data core was untouched. Whitaker stood in the center of the archive room and looked at Cora Vane. She had found a wall to lean against, and she was standing there with her arms loose at her sides and her eyes half closed, not sleeping, but saving energy, the way something trained to conserve itself saves energy. You walked 14 miles through that storm, he said. Alone. Yes, she said. You knew what you'd find here. No. I suspected, she said. I was right. And the man Decker, you knew he'd be here too. A pause. I suspected, she said again. I hoped I was wrong about that part. Whitaker absorbed that. Who else knows what's in those files, he asked. More people than you want to know about, she said quietly. The program didn't stop when the government said it stopped. It just changed ownership. It went private, and it's been running general. Quietly, carefully. In facilities that your satellite imagery doesn't catch, because the people who built them know exactly how to avoid satellite imagery. She opened her eyes fully and looked at him. There are 6 children in a facility in the Northern Range right now. Children who were taken into the program within the last 4 years. Children who have never seen the outside of those walls. A pause. I know because I know the intake records. And I know because someone sent me information before I started walking. Who sent you information? She was quiet for a moment. Someone who couldn't come themselves, she said. Someone who wanted these files protected and those children found. Someone who knew I was the only person who would actually walk 14 miles through a blizzard to make sure it happened. Whitaker looked at the black Talon symbol on her arm. He thought about Clara Vane. I thought about a woman who had died or who had been reported dead, which he was now reconsidering with a kind of vertigo he was not accustomed to feeling. The files, he said, what's actually in them, Cora straightened up from the wall. Everything, she said. The original research, the methodology, the names of every child who went through the program, the names of every person who ran it, the funding sources, the locations. She paused, and the proof that it never stopped. The weight of that landed on Whitaker like something physical. If that information goes public, it needs to go public, Cora said, but carefully, through the right channels, to people who won't bury it again. She looked at him steadily. That's why I came to you, General. Not because you're the strongest, not because you have the most resources, because in 30 years you've never once signed a document that buried the truth. You've been around this thing, Black Talon, the programs, the cover-ups, and you've never put your name on any of it. Whitaker was very still. How do you know that? He said quietly. Because my mother told me, she said. She told me that if there was ever a moment when I needed to trust someone in the military, the name to look for was Whitaker. The room was completely silent. Whitaker felt something move through him that was old and complicated, and that had a lot to do with a parking garage and 2 in the morning, and a woman who had told him things that kept him awake for a year and then disappeared. Your mother, he said, carefully. She, I don't know, Cora said, and for the first time her voice had something in it that was raw, something undefended, something that belonged to an 18-year-old girl and not to a trained operative. I genuinely don't know. And that's the part I haven't figured out how to live with yet. She looked at him, he looked at her. And General Marcus Whitaker, who had spent 30 years being certain about things, found himself completely certain about only one thing in this moment. This girl was telling the truth. All of it. And the world she was describing, the program, the children, the hidden facilities, the ongoing operation was real. It had always been real, and now finally he was going to have to do something about it. The clock on the wall of the command center read 3:47 in the morning when General Whitaker walked back in with Cora Vane at his side. Every person in that room stopped what they were doing. There were 11 people in the command center, senior officers, communications specialists, the base's medical officer who had come in to deal with a frostbite case and hadn't left. Every single one of them looked at Cora the same way, with the specific expression of someone who has been told something but doesn't quite believe it yet. Lieutenant Colonel Hess was standing near the main console with his arms crossed and his jaw set in a way that communicated he had opinions and was barely containing them. She's not going in the secured wing, Hess said immediately. Not a question, a statement. She's already been in the archive, Whitaker said. That was a mistake we haven't finished assessing yet. The mistake, Whitaker said, keeping his voice even, would have been leaving her at the gate. Those files are still in the archive because she told us where to be. Decker's in custody because she talked him down. The extraction crew is on ice because she told us they were there. He stopped. He looked at Hess directly. So I need you to recalibrate, Colonel, because what you're looking at is not a civilian liability. Adjust. Hess said nothing. But his arms uncrossed slowly, and that was as close to standing down as Whitaker was going to get from him tonight. Cora stood through all of this without reacting. She had the sidearm they'd given her, held carefully barrel down, not threatening, just present. Her eyes moved around the command center with that same quiet inventory she'd done in the interrogation room. She was reading the space, reading the people. Sergeant Yolanda Holt was watching her from the far end of the console bank. Holt was the most senior non-commissioned officer on base, and she had the kind of face that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. But she was watching Cora Vane with something that wasn't surprise exactly. It was closer to recognition. Holt had a daughter, 19 years old, currently in her first year at Fort Bragg, and something about the way this girl held herself, that specific combination of absolute readiness and quietly carried exhaustion, made Holt's chest do something uncomfortable. She walked over and handed Cora a cup of coffee without saying anything. Cora looked at it, then looked at Holt. Thank you, she said. You walked 14 miles, Holt said. Drink it. Cora drank it. Whitaker pulled up the file on the main screen. Not the black Talon archive that was still locked down in Sublevel 3, pending a full security review. What he pulled up was the operational record from the last 2 hours. Camera feeds, radio logs, sensor data. The timeline of everything that had happened since the breach alarm went off. He walked his officers through it methodically. The tunnel entry, the sensor grid failure, and the communication blackout. The archive attempt, Decker's surrender, the eastern perimeter intercept. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then Captain Rodriguez said what most of them were thinking. How did she know all of it? The tunnels, the channels, the positioning of all of it. How does an 18-year-old girl know all of that? Because she was trained by the same program that trained the people who came through those tunnels, Whitaker said. More quiet. What program? Rodriguez asked. Whitaker looked at the room. These were his people. They deserved the truth, or as much of it as he was currently cleared to give. He took a breath. There was a program, he said. It ran for approximately 30 years under various designations. The final designation was Black Talon. It was officially terminated. It was not actually terminated. It trained operatives from a very young age. When I say young, I mean children. He paused. Cora Vane was one of those children. The silence that followed had a different quality. Heavier. The kind that comes when people absorb something that reorders their understanding of what kind of world they're living in. Hess had gone very still. The medical officer, a young man named Dr. Carver, who had been in his posting for 3 months, said quietly, "How young?" Whitaker looked at Cora. She looked back at him. He was asking permission, and she gave it with a slight movement of her head. Some of them were taken at 4, she said. Some at 6, some at 8. It depended on what they were being trained for. Younger subjects retained the conditioning more completely. A pause. I was 5. Dr. Carver sat down. He did it like someone whose legs had made the decision without consulting the rest of him. 5 years old, Rodriguez said. Not a question, just repeating it out loud as if saying it would help it make sense. Yes, Cora said. And your parents? My mother was part of the program, she said. As an operative, she didn't know what they were going to do. When she found out, she tried to get me out. Another pause, carefully maintained evenness in her voice. She paid for that. The room absorbed this. Holt was looking at her boots. The old, inadequate boots that had carried this girl 14 miles through a killing storm. She made a decision quietly without announcing it and walked out of the room. Whitaker said, "The people who came through those tunnels tonight are connected to the same organization that ran Black Talon. They've gone private. They have funding. They have infrastructure. And based on what Cora has told me, they have active facilities running the same program right now." He looked around the room. That's the situation. I need everyone in this room operating at full capacity. That means I need you thinking, not frozen. Can everyone do that? Nods, slow ones, but real. Good, Rodriguez, I need a full debrief from Decker. Not a field interrogation, a proper one. He came over because of her. He might come over completely if we do this right. Pull in whatever support you need. Rodriguez nodded and moved. Hess, I need the archive files inventoried and secured. Nobody goes near that data core without my direct authorization and 2 witness signatures. Nobody. Hess moved without argument, which told Whitaker that whatever objections the colonel had were being quietly restructured in light of everything he'd just heard. That left Cora. She was still standing near the console with the coffee cup in the sidearm and the calm that was starting to cost her something. Whitaker could see that now. It had been costing her since she walked through the gate, and it was still costing her, and she was still paying it without complaint. Sit down, he said quietly, not an order, close to a request. She sat. He pulled a chair around and sat across from her and lowered his voice to something that wasn't for the room. Tell me about the facility, he said, the one with the 6 children, everything you know. She set the cup down and looked at him. Northern Range, and she said, approximately 60 miles from here. It's built into a decommissioned mining operation. The structure gives you cover from aerial observation, and it justifies any heat signatures from the ventilation systems. The access road is off a forestry route that your mapping systems show as impassable, but it's been maintained privately. She paused. I have coordinates. How did you get coordinates? She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket, pulled out a small folded piece of paper, set it on the console between them. He unfolded it, looked at the numbers, looked at her. Who gave you this? Someone who has been watching the facility for 8 months, she said. Someone who couldn't move against it alone. Who, Cora? She held his gaze. When I know those children are safe, she said quietly, I'll tell you everything. But if I give you that name right now and something goes wrong, that person is exposed. I won't do that. He held her gaze for a long moment. He wanted to push. He had leverage and authority and 30 years of experience getting people to tell him things they hadn't planned to tell him. But he looked at this girl, this 5-year-old, who had grown into a walking archive of classified catastrophe, who had walked through a storm because no one else would, and he understood that she wasn't withholding out of strategy. She was withholding out of loyalty, and he knew what loyalty cost in the world she'd come from. All right, he said, 60 miles north. What are the defenses? She told him. She told him for 25 minutes straight, without notes, without hesitation, with the kind of precision that came from someone who had spent months preparing for this conversation. Guard rotations, entry points, internal layout, staff numbers, the specific vulnerabilities in their communication setup that came from the fact that they were operating privately and couldn't risk drawing official attention by using military-grade encryption. Whitaker listened to all of it. By the end, he was sitting forward with both arms on the table and his eyes fixed on her with an expression that wasn't quite awe but was close to something that he hadn't felt in a very long time in his career. "You've been planning this for a long time," he said. "Years," she said simply. "On your own. Mostly. How old were you when you left the program?" She looked at the table for a moment. "Just a moment." 15, she said. "I was 15 when I got out." "How did you manage it?" A pause. Something moved across her face that was old and not pleasant and that she controlled quickly. "There was a window," she said, 48 hours when the primary security team was rotating out. I had been documenting that rotation pattern for 7 months. She looked up. "I learned patience from the same people who are running that facility right now. I just used it differently." Sergeant Holt came back into the room. She had a pair of boots, military issue insulated, the right approximate size taken from the supply room. She set them on the floor in front of Cora without ceremony. Cora looked at them, then at Holt. Then she bent down and started unlacing the old boots without comment, but her jaw was tight in a way that might have been about cold feet and might have been about something else. Holt sat down next to her. Not next to Whitaker, next to Cora. "I need to ask you something," Holt said, "and you can tell me to mind my own business." Cora looked at her while changing her boots. "Go ahead." "The children in that facility, how old are they?" A pause. "The youngest is 6, Cora said. "The oldest is 11. Holt's jaw moved. She controlled it. "And they're okay right now tonight. They're physically okay." "Physically, they're alive," Cora said carefully. "Whether they're okay is a more complicated question." Holt nodded slowly. "What do they think is happening? Do they know They don't know anything different," Cora said. "That's the design. You can't make someone a weapon if they understand they're being turned into one. You have to make them believe the world they're living in is just the world." She finished lacing the boots, pressed her feet into them. The difference in her posture was immediate. Something unbraced slightly, and she straightened up. "They don't know there's anything outside those walls. They don't know what a school is, what a birthday party is, what it feels like to be bored because nothing dangerous is happening." A pause. "I didn't know any of those things until I was 15. And even then it took me years to understand what I'd missed." The room had gone quiet again without anyone deciding to make it quiet. Several people had stopped pretending to work and were listening openly. Whitaker let it happen, because these were the moments when information moved from being data into being real. His people needed to feel what this was. They needed it in their bodies, not just in their heads. Dr. Carver spoke from across the room. "When you say they were experimenting on children, what does that mean exactly? What kind of experimentation?" Cora looked at him. "The early program used pharmaceutical enhancement," she said. "Cognitive accelerants, compounds that intensified memory formation, pattern recognition, response time. They were testing whether the developing brain could be optimized." She paused. "Some of the subjects had adverse reactions. The program considered that an acceptable rate of loss." Carver looked like he might be sick. "They called it acceptable rate of loss," he said. "Yes. When you're talking about children. Yes." He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there looking at the storm. Hess came back in from the archive corridor. He stopped in the doorway when he felt the atmosphere. He looked at Whitaker. Whitaker looked back at him. Hess walked in and sat down at the end of the table, and for the first time since the beginning of this night, his face didn't have that particular tight resistance. He looked like a man who has been adjusted by information. "The files," he said, "in sub-level 3. I looked at the indexes, not the files themselves, just the indexes." He stopped, seemed to need a moment. "The date ranges, the volume of records. This program was—" He stopped again. "Larger than anyone knew," Whitaker said. "Yes," Hess said. Then to Cora, "I owe you an apology." She looked at him. He held her gaze. "For tonight, the way I spoke to you, the way I reacted, I was wrong." She studied him for a moment. "You were working with the information you had," she said. "I would have reacted the same way." "That's generous," Hess said. "It's accurate," she said. Something shifted in the room again. These small recalibrations, each one a person adjusting their understanding of who and what they were looking at, were building into something that felt like it had weight. Kowalski came in from the corridor. He looked tired and cold, and he had clearly been thinking hard about something since the archive. He stopped near Cora and said without preamble, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," she said, "the shot earlier. You said they had a sniper not here but in previous operations. In Alaska, you mentioned. What happened in Alaska? What did the program, what did the people running it do there?" Cora looked at him for a moment. "A facility in Alaska was the first one that was reported to outside authorities," she said, "by a local hunting guide who found the perimeter fence. The guide was supposed to be brought in for containment. He wasn't found. The program responded by accelerating their protocol. More security, deeper location, faster intake cycles." She paused. 3 weeks after the guide reported the fence, there were 14 fewer children in that facility than there had been when he found it. The quality of silence that followed that sentence was different from every silence that had come before it. Kowalski didn't say anything else. He sat down. At 4:31 in the morning, Ethan Decker was brought to the main conference room for the extended brief. He came in cuffed and composed, and he looked at the assembled faces without expression until his eyes landed on Cora. She was in the chair to Whitaker's left. Something happened in Decker's expression. Not softness exactly. More like the thing that happens when someone who has been carrying a specific tension for a long time lets go of part of it. They seated him across from Whitaker with Rodriguez on one side and Hess on the other. Cora stayed where she was. "Mr. Decker," de Whitaker said, "let me be direct with you. You're facing significant federal charges. What happens to those charges depends entirely on whether you cooperate with what we're doing here and what that cooperation produces." He paused. "I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not a judge. What I am is the person who can make the next 6 hours of your life significantly more or less difficult, and I'd rather they be less difficult. So let's talk." Decker looked at Whitaker, then at Cora. "She'd tell you about the northern facility," he said. "She told me what she knows," Whitaker said. "You're going to tell me what you know." "I know more than she does," Decker said. "I've been inside it." The air in the room changed. Cora went very still. Whitaker kept his face absolutely neutral. "Tell me." Decker shifted in the chair. He looked at his cuffed hands for a moment, then looked up. "The facility she's describing, it's not the only one. There are 3. The northern one is the smallest. The other 2 are in different jurisdictions, one domestic, one outside the country." He paused. "The organization that hired me has been running all 3 for the last 4 years. The research from this archive was supposed to allow them to expand to 5 facilities by the end of the year." 5, Hess said quietly. "That was the projection," Decker said, "based on their current funding and their intake capacity." "Who's funding it?" Rodriguez asked. Decker was quiet for a moment. He seemed to be weighing something, making a calculation that had to do with things beyond the immediate conversation. "I can give you names," he said finally. 14 names, people with money and with influence and with a very specific belief that certain human capabilities can be engineered and that the return on that investment is worth whatever process is required. His voice stayed flat, but something underneath it was not flat at all. "That's what they call it. The process." "The process," Whitaker repeated. "Yes. And what is the process exactly?" Decker looked at the table. "Everything she described and worse," he said. "The pharmaceutical work has advanced significantly since the early program. They've refined the compounds. The results are more reliable now, which means they're more aggressive in the intake." He stopped. 6 months ago, they brought in a 7-year-old who didn't meet the response threshold they wanted. They increased the dosage. No one asked what happened after that. No one needed to. Rodriguez put his pen down very carefully. Whitaker looked at Decker for a long moment. "You were part of this organization for how long?" 3 years, Decker said. "I came to them from the original program, from after Cora left. They found me when I was 17, told me that my skills had value, that there was a future for what I was trained to do." A pause. "I believed them. For a long time." "What changed?" Whitaker said. Decker looked at Cora. 6 months ago, he said, "the 7-year-old I mentioned. I was in the facility when it happened." He stopped, pressed his jaw together. "I saw what they did. I knew logically that this was what I'd also been through. I knew that. But knowing it and watching it are not the same thing." He held Cora's gaze. "I started looking for a way out. I didn't know how to find you. I didn't know you were still." He stopped. "I thought you were gone." I know, she said quietly. How did you know to come here to this base tonight? The same source that gave me the northern coordinates, she said. Someone who's been watching. Someone who positioned both of us here, I think. Me coming in from outside, you coming in from inside. You saw, Mom? So that if one of us didn't work, maybe the other would. Decker absorbed that. Something moved across his face that was close to disbelief and close to something much more complicated. Someone arranged this. Yes, she said, I think so. Who is that capable of? He stopped. His face changed. Something arrived behind his eyes that looked like the moment when the last piece of a long puzzle drops into place. Cora, your mother. I told you, she said. I don't know. But the coordinates, the positioning, the way this was designed, I don't know, she said again. Harder this time. Covering something. Whitaker watched this exchange carefully. He was going to return to it. At 5:15 in the morning, Whitaker called a strategic session. Rodriguez, Hess-Holt, and two communications officers assembled in the war room with satellite maps of the northern range pinned to the main display. Cora stood at the map with a marker and outlined the facilities she'd described. Access points, guard positions, vulnerable periods in the patrol schedule. She spoke with the precision of someone who had built this briefing in her head over a long time and was finally allowed to deliver it. The officers asked questions. She answered them. Every answer was specific. Every answer was grounded. Holt asked, when we go in, and I'm saying when, not if, how do we handle the children? They don't know us. They've been conditioned to treat strangers as threats. If we come in with a tactical team, they'll respond to aggression, Cora confirmed. Even at 6 years old, they've been conditioned to respond to perceived threat with evasion or attack. A standard tactical breach will be traumatic for them and potentially dangerous for your team. She paused. You need someone with you who they can look at and understand. Someone who comes in without weapons showing, without tactical gear, who speaks to them at their level. Someone like you, Holt said. Yes, Cora said. Hess started to say something and stopped himself. Rodriguez said, she's right. You know she's right. Don't make it complicated. Hess said nothing. Whitaker said, the operation goes in 48 hours. We need weather clearance. We need a team briefed and mobile, and we need to deconflict with the civilian authorities in that jurisdiction before we move. He looked at Cora. You're going to be with us. You are not going to be in the front of the breach team. That's not negotiable, but you will be there, and when those children are secured and it's appropriate for you to be in the room, you will be in the room. He paused. Agreed. She looked at him. Agreed, she said. At 5:47 in the morning, while Rodriguez was coordinating with federal contacts, and Hess was managing the archive lockdown, and Holt was beginning the extraction team briefing, Whitaker found Cora sitting in the corridor outside the war room. Not inside, outside with her back against the wall, and her knees pulled up and her eyes closed. The new boots, the same jacket, the black Talon symbol on her wrist visible below the cuff. He sat down next to her. She didn't open her eyes immediately. Then she did. The man in the corridor, she said. The one I took down, is he talking at? Not yet, Whitaker said. He will. He's mid-level. He won't know about the other two facilities. They operate in compartments. He'll know his assignment and his team structure, and that's it. Still useful, Whitaker said. Yes, she said. A silence. When was the last time you slept? He asked. She considered this. Day before yesterday, she said. Approximately. You walked 14 miles, took down an armed man, talked Decker down, gave us 2 hours of briefing, and you last slept day before yesterday. Yes, she said. How are you still functioning? She looked at him with something in her eyes that was close to a very tired, very complicated kind of humor. Because they trained me to function, she said. That's actually the one useful thing they gave me. He sat with that. The source, he said carefully, the one who sent you here. The coordinates, the positioning of you and Decker. She said nothing. I'm not going to pressure you, he said. But you should know that if that person is in danger, if the people behind this operation know they've been compromised, then that person needs to be protected. And I can't protect someone I don't know exists. Cora stared at the opposite wall. If I tell you, she said, and it turns out I was wrong to trust you, then you were wrong, he said simply. But you came 14 miles through a storm because your mother told you my name. I'd like to think Clara Vane's judgment was good. Something broke very slightly in Cora's composure. Just for a second, she pressed her lips together and held whatever it was back down. The source, she said finally, has been feeding information to 3 different intelligence contacts for the past 8 months, building a case, collecting evidence, mapping the organizational structure. Not just the operational layer, the funding layer. The people above Decker. She paused. The source is inside, has been inside the whole time. Inside the organization, Whitaker said. At a senior level, Cora said. Senior enough to know where all 3 facilities are. Senior enough to know the funding structure. Senior enough to position Decker and me tonight in the same place at the same time. Whitaker absorbed this. And this person made contact with you, he said. 6 months ago, she said. After Decker's incident with the 7-year-old. He wasn't the only one affected. Something shifted. Someone at the top started looking for a way to bring it down from the inside. That's an enormous risk, Whitaker said. If the organization discovered the contact, they would kill the source, Cora said flatly. Yes, which is why I need those children out of that facility before I give you the name. Because once I give you the name, the organization will know the breach immediately. And the first thing they'll do is lock down the facilities. Whitaker understood. If we get the children out first, he said slowly, the lockdown doesn't matter for them and they're already safe. And the source gives you the other 2 locations before the name goes public, Cora said. That's the sequence. That's the plan. He looked at her. Your mother built this plan, he said. Not a question. Her jaw worked. Her eyes held absolutely steady. I can't answer that, she said. Not tonight. Please don't ask me again tonight. He nodded. He let it go. They sat in the corridor in silence for a while. Outside, the storm was finally starting to die. Not gone yet, but the quality of the wind against the building had changed. It was losing force. Holt came out of the war room with 2 field rations and handed one to each of them without comment and went back inside. Cora looked at the ration pack. She opened it and ate. Whitaker watched her and thought about what she had told him in the archive room. 5 years old. He thought about what 5 years old looked like. His granddaughter was 6, and he thought about her face, her laugh, the way she ran to him when he visited. He thought about a child that age being taken somewhere and trained like a weapon and told that this was just the world, that this was how the world worked. I thought about how old Cora Vane had seemed from the moment she walked through that gate. Not old in years, old in the specific way that comes from carrying weight before you were built for it. Can I ask you something, he said. Yes, she said, in the archive room, with Decker. When you told him his past didn't have to decide his future, do you believe that, for yourself, she was quiet for a moment? I want to, she said. Most days I think I do. Most days, she looked at her hands, the symbol on her wrist. There are days when I'm reading a threat situation and I catch myself being grateful for the training. When I understand something about how dangerous people move and think, because I was taught by dangerous people how to move and think, and I don't know what to do with that. She paused. You can't entirely separate what they made from what they made it from who I actually am underneath. No, Whitaker said, you can't. So the honest answer is that I don't know, she said, but I act like I believe it, because if I don't, then the only option is to accept what they designed me to be. And I refuse to do that. A pause. Even on the days when it's difficult. He nodded slowly. Those children, she said, in 48 hours, they need to come out of there without guns pointing at them. They need to come out and have someone in the room who isn't afraid of them and isn't treating them like a threat. They've been told their entire lives that they are dangerous, that they are weapons, that their only value is in their capability. Her voice stayed even, but there was something underneath it that pressed hard against the evenness. The first person they see when they come out needs to look at them like they're just children. You're going to be that person, Whitaker said. Yes, she said, because someone should have done it for you. She looked at him. Something in her face then was completely unguarded. Just for a moment, raw and young and exhausted and certain. Yes, she said. At 6:20 in the morning, the storm officially broke. The wind dropped. The snow stopped. The first gray light of a winter dawn pushed through the eastern windows of Fort Ravenwood for the first time in 4 days. Cora stood at the window in the communications room. Someone had found her a chair near the heating unit and she declined it and stood instead and watched the light come. Sergeant Holt stood beside her. First storm I ever got through, Holt said after a moment. I was 18, National Guard training. We were out in it for 36 hours and I thought I was going to die 3 separate times. She paused. Afterward, the light coming up looked different than it ever had, like I'd earned it. Cora didn't say anything for a moment. Then yes, she said quietly, like that. In the conference room, Ethan Decker was giving Rodriguez the 14 names. In Sub-Level 3, Hess was overseeing the secure packaging of the Black Talon data core. In the war room, the extraction team was being briefed on a facility 60 miles north. And in the corridor outside the communications room, a piece of paper with coordinates written in handwriting that Whitaker had spent 30 years not seeing sat in his jacket pocket. He took it out one more time and looked at it. He thought about Clara Vane. I thought about the parking garage and 2 in the morning, and a woman who had told him, if there's ever a moment when all of this comes to the surface, when someone finally has the evidence and needs the right person to receive it, I'll find a way to send them to you. He folded the paper. He put it back in his pocket. He walked toward the communications room to check on Cora Vane. And somewhere in the northern mountains, 60 miles from Fort Ravenwood, in a facility built into the bones of a decommissioned mine, 6 children were waking up to another day that looked exactly like every day they had ever known. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that the world they were about to enter had things in it they had never been allowed to imagine. They didn't know that someone was already moving toward them. Someone who understood exactly what they were going through. Because she had been exactly where they were, and she had survived it, and she was coming. The 48 hours that followed were the longest of Cora Vane's life, and that was saying something because she had lived through things that most people couldn't imagine surviving. She slept 4 hours in a bunk that Sergeant Holt arranged for her in the women's quarters, 4 hours, and then she was awake again, not because anything woke her, but because her body had been trained to treat extended sleep as a vulnerability. She lay there for a few minutes staring at the ceiling, listening to the bass sounds, and then she got up and went back to work. There was a lot of work. The federal contacts that Rodriguez had pulled in overnight were now fully engaged, and Fort Ravenwood had shifted from a military installation managing a breach to something closer to the operational center of a federal investigation. People were arriving despite the road's snowmobiles, then a military helicopter once the storm broke fully, then 2 black SUVs that had clearly been moving since before dawn. Men and women in suits who carried themselves with the specific energy of people who worked in rooms with no windows. Cora watched them arrive from the window of the communications room and felt the particular tension that came from knowing that the next 48 hours would either dismantle something that had existed for 30 years or give it time to disappear again. The margins were that thin. She knew it. She had known it since she started walking. At 9:15 in the morning, Whitaker brought her into a room with 3 federal agents. 2 from a division she recognized, 1 from an agency whose presence surprised her and then didn't, because the deeper you went into what Black Talon actually was, the wider the institutional involvement became. The lead agent's name was Hara, mid-40s compact, the kind of stillness that came from long experience in rooms where the wrong word cost lives. She looked at Cora the way Whitaker had looked at her in the beginning, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she'd been told, and then she set that aside and got to work. Walk me through what you know, Hara said, from the beginning, not from last night, from the beginning. Cora looked at Whitaker. He gave her a slight nod. Your call. She looked back at Hara. How much time do you have? Cora asked. As much as you need, Hara said. So Cora talked. She talked for 2 hours straight, not with notes, not with hesitation, not with the kind of careful self-editing that most people apply when they're talking to federal agents. She talked the way someone talks when they have been carrying something for years and the moment to set it down has finally arrived and they are not going to waste it. She talked about what it felt like to be 5 years old and understand that the adults around you were not there to protect you. About the training protocols, the physical conditioning that began before most children could read, the psychological evaluation cycles that ran constantly, the pharmaceutical administrations that the children were told were vitamins. She talked about the facility structure, the staff hierarchy, the specific individuals whose names she had memorized with the same precision she had applied to everything else. She talked about what it felt like at 15 to realize that the window was there. She talked about the 48 hours of running. Hara didn't interrupt. The two other agents were writing constantly. Whitaker sat in the corner and said nothing. When Cora finished, the room was completely still. Hara looked at her for a long moment. "You've been building this case," Hara said, "for 3 years. "Since I had enough distance to build it safely," Cora said. "Yes." "And the source inside the organization." "After the facility operation," Cora said. "The children come out first." Hara held her gaze. "I need to know that source is reliable. I need to verify the 14 names Decker gave you last night," Cora said. "Cross-reference them against the financial records I'm going to give you in approximately 6 hours. If those records corroborate the names, that should tell you how reliable the source is." Hara went still. "You have financial records." "I have 6 years of transaction data structured through 9 shell entities across 4 jurisdictions," Cora said. "I have it in digital form, and I have it memorized as a backup because I learned early that physical records can be taken." She paused. "I need an encrypted channel and a secure terminal. The data transfer takes about 40 minutes. Hara looked at the other agents, then back at Cora. "You're 18 years old," Hara said, not dismissive, almost like she was saying it to remind herself. "Yes," Cora said. "And you've been doing this, gathering this, how long?" "Building the digital case 3 years," Cora said. "Memorizing critical data as a redundant backup 2 years. Before that, I was still close enough to the program that gathering would have gotten me found and brought back." She paused. "I had a very specific window. I used it." At 11:40 in the morning, the extraction team briefing moved into its final phase. 14 soldiers, carefully selected. Rodriguez had been pulling people for the past 6 hours based on a specific profile, combat trained, but also psychologically suited for an operation that was going to require an unusual combination of force and restraint. People who could breach a facility and then immediately shift into a mode that wasn't threatening to traumatize children. It was a harder combination to find than it sounded. Cora attended the briefing. She sat in the front row, and she didn't speak until Rodriguez opened the floor for questions, and then she didn't answer questions. She gave corrections. Not hostile corrections, precise ones. The kind that come from having information the briefer doesn't have. "The guard rotation you're showing for the eastern entrance is based on satellite imaging from 4 months ago," she said. "It's been modified. The current rotation runs on a 90-minute cycle instead of 60, and there's an additional post on the tunnel access that your imaging wouldn't have captured because it's interior." Rodriguez looked at her. "How current is your information?" 48 hours, she said. "How is that possible?" She looked at him steadily. He understood. He moved on. Sergeant Holt was leading the secondary team, the one that would enter the children's quarters once the facility was secured. She had spent the morning in consultation with Dr. Carver about what to expect. Carver had done his research fast and hard, pulling everything he could find about child survivors of institutional abuse and coercive conditioning. He didn't have a lot to work with in terms of direct precedent because situations like this had been buried for decades, but he had enough. He briefed Holt for 40 minutes. At the end, Holt said, "What's the most important thing, the single most important thing when we go in?" Carver thought about it. "Don't correct them," he said. "Whatever they say, whatever they believe, whatever they've been taught, don't immediately challenge it. They've built their entire understanding of the world around what they were taught in there. If you walk in and immediately start telling them that everything they know is wrong, you're threatening their entire reality. You'll get shut down behavior." He paused. "Go in and be calm. Be warm. Don't have weapons visible if you can help it. Let them set the pace." Holt nodded. "And if they're aggressive?" she asked. "Physically. They've been conditioned to respond to don't escalate," Carver said. "Do not match aggression with aggression. They'll interpret that as confirmation that you're a threat, and everything they've been taught kicks in." He paused. "This is going to be very different from any operation you have done before." "I know," Holt said. She went and found Cora. "The youngest one," Holt said. "The 6-year-old. What can you tell me about them?" Cora looked at her. "What do you want to know? What will they be afraid of specifically?" Cora was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about a very specific thing, and the thinking was visible in a way that most things weren't with her. "Loud voices," she said finally. "Any sudden loud noise or raised voice. They'll have been conditioned to associate that with punishment protocols. Also," she stopped, "they'll be afraid of people who smile too quickly." Staff in the program learned to use warmth as a manipulation tool, smiling when something bad was about to happen. Some of the children learned to read a smile as a warning sign. Holt absorbed that. So don't smile right away, she said. Don't fake anything, Cora said. They'll read it. They're extraordinarily good at reading people. You go in there projecting forced positivity, and they will not trust you. Go in there being honest and calm, and she paused. Present. Just be present. Let them come to you. Holt nodded, then quietly, you were 6 once in a place like that. Yes, Cora said. What would you have needed if someone had come? A long pause. Someone to stay of the doorway and not move, Cora said. Not come toward me, not tell me everything was okay because I would have known that was a lie. Just stay in the doorway and be there. And after a while, she stopped. After a while, I would have come to them. At 1:30 in the afternoon, everything changed. Cora was in the middle of the financial data transfer sitting with Hara and a federal communications specialist at a secured terminal walking through 6 years of transaction records from memory with the kind of precision that made the specialist stop twice to verify that what he was receiving was real when Rodriguez came in fast. His face said something had gone wrong. We have a problem, he said. Whitaker looked up from the console where he'd been reviewing the extraction timeline. What, Decker? Rodriguez said. In the middle of the extended debrief about an hour ago. He told us something. He didn't think it was relevant at the time, or he was holding it, I don't know which. But he told us. Tell us now, Whitaker said. Rodriguez looked at Cora. The organization has a monitoring protocol on the northern facility, he said. Automated. If there's no contact signal from the facility director at specific intervals, it triggers an alert to the central command structure. How often? Whitaker said. Every 12 hours, Rodriguez said. The last signal was, he checked his watch. 8 hours ago, which means in 4 hours, the absence of signal triggers an alert. The room went quiet. Hara set down her pen. Cora stopped talking. If the alert triggers, Rodriguez said, they lock down the facility, not just lock down, the director has a standing order to move the children to a secondary location. One that we don't have coordinates for. Those children disappear, Hara said flatly. Yes, Rodriguez said. Everyone looked at the extraction timeline on the main screen. The operation was planned for the following morning, 16 hours away. We have to move tonight, Cora said. The team isn't ready, Rodriguez said. We have 4 hours before that alert triggers, Cora said. We need to reach the facility in 60 miles of mountain terrain in winter. That's 90 minutes at best if we're moving fast and the roads are passable, which means we have 2.5 hours to mobilize. She was already standing. The team is ready enough. The alternative is those children are gone. Rodriguez looked at Whitaker. Holt had come in during Rodriguez's briefing and was standing near the door. Whitaker looked at the timeline, at the satellite map, at the coordinates on the piece of paper that was still in his jacket pocket. Is there any way to spoof the signal? Hara asked. Make it look like the director sent the check-in. Decker doesn't know the specific protocol, Rodriguez said. The signal is encrypted on a device the director carries personally. We'd need the device. Can we intercept it? Cora asked. She was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Whitaker could see it in her eyes. If we can get someone into communication range of the facility before the alert window, can we? Not in time, Rodriguez said. The encryption changes each cycle. We'd need the director's specific credentials. Cora's jaw tightened. There's a way, Holt said from the doorway. Everyone looked at her. We don't spoof the signal, Holt said. We just make the 4 hours irrelevant. She looked at Whitaker. We're already in the air in 3 hours. We hit the facility in 4 hours and 15 minutes. Yes, the alert triggers, but if we're already inside, it doesn't matter. If we're already inside when the alert triggers, the director gets a lockdown order while we're in the middle of an extraction, Rodriguez said. That's a contested extraction with children in the middle of it. Yes, Holt said simply. It is. Another silence. She's right, Cora said. Waiting means losing them. Going in during alert means a harder extraction, but they're still there to extract. She looked at Whitaker. I'd rather a hard extraction than none. Whitaker looked around the room. These were the moments he had spent 30 years training for. Not the easy decisions, The ones where every option had a cost, and you had to choose which cost was bearable. Get the team ready, he said. We're in the air in 2 hours and 45 minutes. Rodriguez, I need an updated operational brief in 90 minutes. Holt, start your team prep now. He turned to Cora. You're coming. Same parameters we discussed. You're not in the breach. You're in secondary approach. When it's appropriate, you go in. She nodded. And Cora finished the data transfer first. Hara said, whatever happens out there, I need that financial record in federal hands before the operation. If something goes wrong tonight, and that data is still only in your memory. 40 minutes, Cora said. She sat back down at the terminal. Give me 40 minutes. She finished in 38. The mobilization of Fort Ravenwood in 90 minutes was something Cora had never seen before, and she had seen a lot of things that required speed. It was the kind of organized urgency that only happens when everyone in the building understands exactly what is at stake and has decided collectively that failure is not an option they're willing to accept. Holt ran the team through a compressed version of the final brief. The 14-person extraction team moved through gear check and loadout with the kind of focus that made Cora think briefly that maybe the human capacity for purpose was the thing that she had most underestimated for all the years she'd been moving alone. Dr. Carver was coming. He'd asked quietly and Rodriguez had approved it, and Cora was glad. He was terrified she could see it, but he was coming anyway, which was the most important thing. At 4:10 in the afternoon, 3 military helicopters lifted off from Fort Ravenwood into the cold afternoon skyline. The mountains were clear after the storm, the kind of clear that comes after severe weather where the air has been scoured clean and everything looks slightly sharper than it normally does, like the world has been reset. Cora sat in the second helicopter next to Holt. Rodriguez was in the first. Whitaker was in the command position in the third. She looked at the mountains. Holt watched her. You okay? Holt asked. Ask me in 2 hours, Cora said. They flew. The facility appeared exactly where the coordinates said it would be. From the air, it looked like exactly what it was supposed to look like. A decommissioned industrial site, weathered and apparently idle, the kind of thing you'd see from a distance and dismiss if you didn't know what to look for. Cora knew what to look for. There, she said into the headset, the eastern structure, the one that looks like a collapsed storage building. It's not collapsed. The roof configuration is deliberate. It breaks the thermal signature from above. Rodriguez's voice came back. We see it. The main entrance is north-facing, but it's not the primary access point anymore. They moved primary access to the tunnel connection on the southwest corner about 8 months ago. Your satellite imaging won't show it. A pause. Confirmed, Rodriguez said. Good eyes. The helicopters descended to a landing point a half-mile from the facility, far enough to be out of casual sight and sound range, but close enough that the team could move on foot quickly. The cold hit them when the doors opened. Mountain cold, different from the base cold, thinner and sharper. The snow here was undisturbed and deep, and the sky above was going from afternoon blue towards something darker at the edges. Cora got out and immediately oriented herself. She had studied this terrain from maps and descriptions, and from the mental image she'd built over months of preparation, and now she was standing in it, and her body was doing the thing it always did. Calibrating, adjusting, processing the difference between the plan and the reality. Holt stood beside her. Matches your description, she said quietly. Yes, Cora said. Close enough. Rodriguez assembled the team. Rapid low-voice briefing. Points of entry timing sequence. Holt's secondary team on a 30-second delay after breach confirmation. Dr. Carver behind Holt, and Cora behind Carver with Kowalski, who had specifically requested to be on the team and whom Rodriguez had approved without explanation beside her. You've been in a facility like this, Kowalski said quietly while the briefing ran. I've been in this kind of facility, she said. Not this specific one. Is there a difference? The smell, she said. Institutional facilities have a very specific smell. Cleaning compound and recycled air, and something underneath that I don't have a word for. When I walk in there and it smells the way I know it's going to smell. She stopped. I'll be fine, but I'm telling you because you should know it might affect me for a moment. Kowalski looked at her. I've got you, he said. She looked at him, nodded once. Rodriguez said, on my mark, 3, 2, 1. They moved. The breach team covered the half-mile in 9 minutes through knee-deep snow, moving in the particular silence of people who have trained to move in silence. Cora moved with them, not at the front, but not at the back either. And she was listening to everything. Every sound the environment made, every variation in the wind, every difference between what she expected and what was actually there. The first contact happened faster than anyone expected. One guard exterior positioned at a point that Cora had marked as a possibility, but not a certainty. The facility had apparently added the post within the last few days. Rodriguez's point man handled it cleanly and quietly, and they kept moving. But Cora knew that the timing had just gotten tighter. If the post was on a check-in protocol, and it almost certainly was, the absence of a scheduled check-in would register inside faster than the external alert. "We have less time than we thought," she said into her headset. "Interior protocols may be running on the guard's schedule. If he was supposed to check in, understood," Rodriguez said. "We push." They pushed. The southwest tunnel entrance was exactly where Cora had said it would be. Rodriguez's breacher cleared the lock in 40 seconds. The tunnel was dark and close and smelled of cold metal, and Cora walked into it, and her chest did the thing she had told Kowalski about, that old visceral recognition that went below the level of thought. She kept walking. Kowalski was at her shoulder. They were 40 feet into the tunnel when the internal alarm went off. Not the external alert. This was the interior system triggered by the guard's missed check-in. It was a specific sound, 2 short tones, repeated in a pattern that would mean nothing to an outside observer, but that Cora recognized immediately. "Lockdown preparation," she said into the headset. "They're starting the lockdown. The director will be moving to the children's wing to begin the transfer protocol." Her voice was fast and completely flat. "Rodriguez, you need to be in the main corridor in the next 90 seconds or the children start moving." "We're moving," Rodriguez said. Cora was moving too. She stepped around Carver without explanation and came up behind the last member of the breach team, and Kowalski came with her without being asked. The tunnel opened into the facility's lower level. The lights were emergency shifted facility going to internal protocol mode. Red-tinted corridor lighting that made everything look like a different world. Cora knew this lighting. She had grown up in this lighting. She kept her pace and her breathing steady. The breach team hit the first resistance point. 2 interior guards who had responded to the alarm, and the contact was fast and professional, and the team moved through it before Cora had fully registered it was happening. Rodriguez's voice, "Corridor 2 clear, moving to the main junction." Then another voice hissed back at the base, monitoring on comms. "We're tracking movement on the interior system, Rodriguez. 3 individuals moving toward the northwest quadrant. That's your children's wing." "That's the director and an escort moving the children," Cora said. "They're not going to the main exit. They'll be going to the tunnel on the facility's north side. There's a vehicle access point. Decker mentioned it." She pulled up everything she knew. "It comes out approximately 200 meters north of the facility perimeter." Rodriguez made a split-second decision. "Holt, take your team north external. Cut off the tunnel exit. Go now." Holt was already moving before he finished the sentence. Cora went with her. They came out of the facility's southwest entrance and moved north along the exterior Holt's secondary team. Running in the cold, and Cora was running with them because the children were in there, and someone was trying to move them, and she was not going to let that happen. They found the tunnel exit. It was a heavy steel door set into the ground at an angle, and it was already opening from the inside. Holt's team formed around it immediately. Cora pushed to the front. Holt led her. The door came fully open. A man came up first, late 50s, in the kind of institutional clothing that telegraphed authority, moving fast, and he stopped when he saw 14 people standing in the snow around the exit point. For a moment, he and Cora looked at each other. His eyes moved to her arm, to the symbol. Something went through his face. "You're one of," he started. "Step away from the door," Holt said. He didn't move. "I said step away from the door," Holt said again, and there was something in her voice that was very clear and very final. The man stepped aside. Behind him, moving up through the tunnel, were 2 additional staff members. And behind them were children, 6 of them, moving in a line the way children who have been taught to move in lines, move organized, quiet, fast. The oldest looked about 11. The youngest, the 6-year-old, was at the back holding the jacket of the child in front of him. They came up into the cold and the fading afternoon light, and they stopped. They looked at the soldiers. Nobody moved for a moment. Cora stepped forward. She moved carefully away from the cluster of armed soldiers into a position where she was between them and the children, and where the children could see her clearly. She had no weapon showing. She had nothing threatening about her posture. She stood in the doorway, and she didn't move forward. The oldest child, a girl, brown hair, and watching everything with eyes that were old, in the same way Cora's eyes were old, looked at her. They looked at each other. "Your name," Cora said quietly. "What's your name?" The girl said nothing, but she was watching. "My name is Cora," she said. "I know you don't know me, and I know this is frightening and confusing, and nothing about right now makes sense." She paused. "I also know that you've been taught not to trust people you haven't been introduced to by your handlers. And I'm not going to ask you to trust me. Not yet." Another pause. "But I need you to hear one thing." The girl was still looking at her. The other children were looking at her too. The 6-year-old had stopped hiding behind the older child and was peering around them. "You haven't done anything wrong," Cora said. "None of you. Whatever they've told you about why you're here, whatever they've told you about what you are, none of it is your fault. And none of it is the only thing you can be." She looked at each of them in turn. "I know, because I was exactly where you are, in a place exactly like this. And I got out, and I'm standing here, and the door behind me is open." A silence that had weight to it. The girl, the oldest one, said, "Where are you taking us?" "Somewhere warm," Cora said, "with a doctor, with food, somewhere that nobody is going to run drills, or check your response times, or give you injections." She paused. "Somewhere you can just be." A long moment. The girl looked at the soldiers. At Holt, who was standing still and calm, with her hands visible and no weapon drawn. At Dr. Carver, who was pale and clearly struggling, but who was standing there. Then the girl looked at Cora again. "You really were in a place like this," she said. "Yes," Cora said. "How old were you?" "I went in when I was 5, Cora said. "I came out when I was 15. Something moved across the girl's face. A calculation. The same kind of calculation Cora recognized because she had made the same one at the same age, the specific math of deciding whether someone's words matched their eyes. "Okay," the girl said finally. She stepped forward. The other children followed her. The 6-year-old came last. He came out of the tunnel and into the light, and he stopped and looked at the sky. He looked at it for a long moment because the sky was something he had rarely seen and he was processing it. Then he looked at Cora. "Is it always this big?" he said. She looked at him. Something in her chest that she had been keeping compressed for 24 hours released in a way that she couldn't entirely control. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady, but just barely. "It's always this big." He looked at the sky again. "Okay," he said. The same word as the oldest girl, the same calculation in his small face, the same decision. He reached out and took Cora's hand. She held it. Behind her, she heard Holt make a sound that wasn't quite a breath and wasn't quite a word. She heard Kowalski say something very quietly to the person next to him. She heard Dr. Carver walk forward and start talking to the children in a voice that was warm and careful and real. The facility's director was in custody. His 2 escorts were down. Rodriguez's team had secured the interior and was moving through the staff quarters, bringing in the remaining personnel one by one. The facility was secured. The children were out. Cora stood in the cold mountain air with a 6-year-old's hand in hers and looked at the sky he had just noticed for the first time, and she didn't move for a moment. She just stood there. And somewhere underneath the training and the years and the weight of everything she had been carrying and dragging and fighting through since she was 5 years old, somewhere underneath all of that, something that had been braced for a very long time, slowly began to let go. Kowalski came and stood next to her. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything either. They stood there. After a moment, Cora looked at him. "There's something I need to tell Whitaker," she said. "When we get back." "The source," Kowalski said. "Yes." She looked at the children who were being moved carefully and gently toward the helicopters by Holt's team and Dr. Carver. Organized, warm human. The oldest girl was watching everything around her with those old eyes, and Cora could see the specific moment when the girl started to actually believe in her body that this was real, that this was actually happening. "The children are safe," Cora said, "which means the sequence is complete. Which means the name can go to Whitaker." And then she looked at him. "And then we find out how deep this goes," she said. "The other 2 facilities. The 14 names Decker gave us. The funding network, all of it." "That's going to take time," Kowalski said. Yes, she said. It is. Are you ready for that? She looked at the sky again. The same sky the 6-year-old had just seen for the first time. I've been ready for 3 years, she said. Then her radio crackled. Rodriguez's voice. Cora, we found something in the director's office. You need to come see this. The tone of his voice was wrong, not urgent in the way of danger, urgent in the way of something that had shifted the ground beneath him, and he needed her to be standing on the same shifted ground as him. She looked at Kowalski. He looked at her. Go, he said. He looked at the 6-year-old who was still loosely holding her hand. I've got him. The boy looked up at Kowalski, studied him for a moment with that precise evaluating gaze. Then he moved his hand from Cora's to Kowalski's. Kowalski held it. Cora turned and walked back toward the facility. Whatever Rodriguez had found it had shaken him, and there was almost nothing that shook Rodriguez. She moved faster. The director's office was on the facility's second level, a small room with a locked cabinet that Rodriguez's team had opened, and an array of files and a laptop that was already being bagged by a federal tech. Rodriguez was standing in the middle of the room with a single photograph in his hand. He held it out when she came in. She took it. It was a photograph of a woman, dark hair going to gray. The kind of face that was hard to read, but that if you knew what to look for, you could see had been trained to be that way. Standing somewhere outdoor winter, the photograph taken from enough distance that it wasn't a posed shot, a surveillance photograph, but stamped across the bottom in the particular red ink that Cora knew from documents she had studied for years, was a black Talon administrative notation. And beneath the notation a date, 14 months ago, and beneath the date, a status designation that made Cora's hand grip the photograph hard enough that Rodriguez noticed and said her name. She wasn't listening. She was staring at the photograph, at the woman, at the face she had last seen when she was 15 years old. At the notation at the bottom that said in the organizational language of a program that classified everything asset status active. Her mother was alive. Clara Vane was alive, and she was inside the organization, not as a prisoner, as an asset, for 14 months at minimum. The room was very still. Rodriguez said her name again carefully. Cora lowered the photograph. Her face was completely controlled. Every piece of the training that she had spent 3 years trying to use for something different from its intended purpose was deployed right now in this moment, holding her expression and her voice and her posture in a configuration that said she was processing, not breaking. But inside, behind all of that, something had just cracked open that she did not know how to close. How do you know her? Rodriguez asked quietly. Cora set the photograph down on the desk. She's the source, Cora said. Her voice was level, completely level. And she's my mother. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Rodriguez didn't push her. He stood in the director's office and watched Cora hold the words she just said, mother, in the air between them. And he had enough sense and enough experience to understand that the next 30 seconds required absolutely nothing from him except presence. She stood with her hands flat on the desk, the photograph face up between them. Her breathing was controlled in the precise way that training controls breathing, when the alternative is something the training was specifically designed to prevent. Then she picked up the photograph again. She looked at it for a long moment, really looked at it. The gray coming into the dark hair, the set of the jaw, the particular way the shoulders carried a weight that had been there for years. Surveillance distance, but close enough. Close enough that Cora could read the posture. She knew that posture. She had spent the first 15 years of her life watching it move through rooms and corridors and training spaces, and she had spent the 3 years after that trying to remember it clearly enough to hold on to. When was this taken? She said. Her voice was completely flat, operational flat, not emotional flat. The date stamp puts it 14 months ago, Rodriguez said carefully. The location metadata, he paused. It traces to a facility in the Pacific Northwest. One of the two we don't have coordinates for. Cora nodded slowly. Active asset, she said, reading the notation at the bottom again. That's an organizational status code. It means she's operational. It means she's active within the structure, not imprisoned, not being held. She set the photograph down again. It means she's working. Rodriguez watched her process this. She could be working against them, he said quietly. If she's the source, she is the source, Cora said. I'm certain of that. The way the information was structured, The depth of organizational knowledge, the financial records she positioned me to receive, that's not an outside observer. That's someone with access at a senior operational level. She paused. The question is whether the notation means what it looks like it means. What does it look like it means? Cora looked at him. It looks like she went back, Cora said, after she got me out. It looks like she went back in. Rodriguez said nothing. And I don't know if she went back to destroy it from the inside, Cora said, or if she went back because they brought her back. She stopped, pressed her jaw together. Those are very different things, Rodriguez. And the photograph doesn't tell me which one it is. She picked up the photograph one more time. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that and hated that she noticed herself being proud of it because this was her mother's face, and her hands should not have been steady. She put the photograph in her jacket pocket. I need to talk to Whitaker, she said, and I need to talk to Hara. And then I need you to pull everything that came out of this office, every file, every drive, every piece of paper, and I need it at Fort Ravenwood by tonight. Already in motion, Rodriguez said. Good. She turned toward the door. Cora. Rodriguez said her name with a weight that stopped her. She turned. He looked at her for a moment. Just looked at her, and the expression on his face was the kind that men who have spent careers in hard situations wear when they see something that moves them and don't know what to do with the moving. You okay, he said. Simple. Direct. She held his gaze. Ask me tomorrow, she said. Same answer she'd given Holt on the helicopter. She walked out. The helicopters back to Fort Ravenwood carried a different weight than the ones going out. The 6 children were distributed across the transport, each with at least one team member they had chosen proximity to in the first few minutes after coming up from the tunnel. The 6-year-old, whose name they had learned was Eli, was asleep against Kowalski's arm before they were 20 minutes into the flight. The oldest girl, who had given her name as Marin, sat across from Cora and watched the mountains through the window with an expression that kept shifting between wonder and something more careful. Dr. Carver was moving between the children, doing quiet initial assessments. Not formal examinations, he was too experienced to try that yet. Just conversation, presence, temperature checks disguised as casual touch, checking eyes and skin, and the quality of breathing with the specific attention of someone who had spent the helicopter flight out reading everything he could find and was now applying it. He came and sat near Cora between checks. They're physically healthier than I expected, he said, keeping his voice low. Malnourished by normal standards, but not severely. Regular physical conditioning means their muscle development is actually advanced for their ages. The pharmaceutical protocols, he stopped. I won't know the full picture until we run blood work, but none of them are showing acute distress. The distress isn't acute, Cora said. It's structural. It's built into how they process everything. She paused. You won't see it in their blood work. You'll see it when someone does something kind and they don't know how to respond to it. You'll see it when they have free time and they don't know what free time is. You'll see it in 18 months when they're in a normal environment and certain sounds or certain patterns of behavior trigger responses that look completely disproportionate from the outside. She paused. It takes years to understand what was done to you, and more years after that to build something different. Carver was quiet. Is that your experience? He said. Yes, she said. You're 18, he said, not critically, almost gently. Yes, she said, which means you've been building something different for 3 years, she said. Yes, a pause. It's slow work. He nodded. Marin from across the helicopter was watching this conversation. Cora saw her watching. She caught the girl's eyes and held them for a moment, then gave her a slight nod that said, yes, we're talking about you and it's not a threat. Marin looked back at the mountains. At 7:55 in the evening, the helicopters landed at Fort Ravenwood. Hara and 2 of her agents were waiting on the landing pad. Whitaker was behind them. The base had been further transformed in the hours they'd been gone. More federal personnel, 2 additional vehicles, a communications array that someone had set up in what had been the secondary briefing room. The children were moved inside quickly. Warm. A space that Sergeant Holt and 2 other team members had spent the last hour preparing, not clinical, not like the facility actual effort made to make it look like a place rather than an installation. Someone had found a box of board games from somewhere. Someone had brought in extra blankets. Small things. Real things. Marin walked in and stopped. She looked around the room, at the blankets and the games and the table with actual food on it, sandwiches, fruit things that weren't calibrated. Nutrition bars. Her expression did something complicated that moved through shock and caution in something approaching belief. "This is for us," she said. Holt said yes. Myron looked at her. "Why?" she said, not suspicious, genuinely asking. The concept of something being done for her without an ulterior purpose was something she genuinely needed explained. Holt held her gaze. "Because you're children," Holt said, "because this is what children are supposed to have." Marin processed that. Then she walked to the table and picked up a sandwich and held it in both hands and looked at it for a moment like she was memorizing it, and then she sat down and ate it. Eli woke up when they landed and had spent the walk from the landing pad to the room holding Kowalski's hand, looking at everything with those wide-awake eyes. When he came into the room and saw the food, he stopped. He looked up at Kowalski. "Are we in trouble?" he said. Kowalski crouched down to his level. "No," he said. "Nobody's in trouble. You're safe." Eli looked at him for a long moment with that evaluating child face. "Safe means something happened," Eli said. "They used to say we were safe right before something happened." Kowalski held his gaze. "I know," he said, "but I mean it differently. Safe means nothing bad is coming. Safe means you can eat and sleep and nobody is going to wake you up with a drill." Eli stared at him. "Ever," he said. "Not here," Kowalski said. "Not tonight." Another long evaluation. Then Eli let go of Kowalski's hand, walked to the table and picked up 2 sandwiches. He stood there eating both of them with the systematic efficiency of a child who had never had enough food and was not going to waste the opportunity. And after a moment, something in his small shoulders released, and he was just a 6-year-old eating sandwiches and looking around a room. Kowalski stood up and turned away quickly. He stood facing the wall for a few seconds with his jaw tight. Holt moved past him and touched his arm briefly. He nodded. They didn't need words. Cora went directly to Whitaker. She found him in the command center standing over the console with Hera and 2 of the federal agents, and she walked in and said, "I need 5 minutes, just you and Hera." He looked at her face. "Clear the room," he said immediately. The other agents moved out. Cora put the photograph on the console. Whitaker looked at it. His face changed. She watched it change. She watched 30 years of information and memory and professional detachment all hit the photograph at once. And she watched the man who had maintained absolute composure through an entire night and day of extraordinary circumstances go very still in the specific way of someone who has just seen something they were not prepared for. "Where did you find this?" he said quietly. "Director's office," she said. "Rodriguez secured the full contents. Federal Tech has the drives. And this was in a physical file." Hara reached for the photograph. She looked at it. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes were moving fast. "Who is she?" Hara said. "Clara Vane," Whitaker said before Cora could speak. His voice was careful and slow. "The best operative black Talon ever produced." He paused. "And Cora's mother." Hera looked at Cora. "She's the source," Cora said. "The person who sent me here. The person who built the financial case I transferred to you this morning. The person who positioned Decker and me so that one of us would reach this base and get those files protected and those children out." She pointed to the notation at the bottom of the photograph. "And 14 months ago, at minimum, she was still operational inside the organization." "Active asset," Hara said, reading the notation. "Yes." "Do you know what that means in their classification system?" "I know exactly what it means," Cora said. "It means she's working. It means she has active assignments within the organizational structure. It means she's not a prisoner and she's not a ghost." She paused. "What I don't know is whether she's working for them or against them. Or both." Hara set the photograph down. She was thinking fast. Cora could see it in the quality of her attention, the way she was pulling threads together. "If she went back in voluntarily," Hara said slowly, "to work against them from the inside the financial records she built, the organizational mapping, the positioning of you and Decker, that's not something you do in a week. That's years of sustained deep cover operation." She paused. "Within a private organization that kills people who expose it." "Yes," Cora said. "She's been doing this for years," Hera said. "Yes. With no support structure, no handler, no extraction protocol." "Correct." Hera looked at Whitaker. Whitaker was still looking at the photograph with an expression that Cora couldn't entirely read. There was something in it that was old and complicated, and that went back further than tonight. Marcus, Hara said, "What do you know about Clara Vane's exit from the program?" Whitaker looked up. "Officially," he said, "she was killed in a field operation 12 years ago. The report was classified at a level I wasn't cleared to access." He paused. "I never believed the report, but I also had no evidence to counter it. And unofficially, a silence. Unofficially," he said, "Clara Vane was the kind of person who didn't get killed in field operations. She got out of them. Always." He looked at Cora. "You said she told you my name, that if you ever needed to trust someone in the military, come to me." "Yes," Cora said. "When did she tell you that?" Cora held his gaze. "The night she got me out of the facility," she said. "When I was 15, she had about 45 minutes with me before she had to go back. Before she had to return, before anyone realized she'd left." A pause. "That's the last time I saw her. She had 45 minutes and she spent them making sure I had everything I needed to survive on my own. Protocol, emergency contacts, your name." A pause. "And she told me that she wasn't done, that there was more to do and she was going to do it." "She told a 15-year-old that she was going back in," Whitaker said. "She told me the truth," Cora said. "That was the one thing she always did that the program couldn't train out of her. She told me the truth even when the truth was hard." She stopped. "Even when the truth was that she had to leave me." The room was quiet. Hara said, "We need to find her." "Yes," Cora said. "The two facilities we don't have coordinates for. If she's active at a senior level, she may know the locations." "She knows the locations," Cora said. "The financial records I gave you this morning will get you within range. But the specific coordinates will be with her," she paused, "or in whatever documentation the director's office produced. Rodriguez's team is still going through it. If she's inside and the organization figures out that tonight happened," Hara started. "They already know," Cora said. "The moment we secured the northern facility, the alert triggered organizationally. They know the facility is compromised. They know Decker turned. They'll be pulling back, covering tracks, moving assets." She paused. "And they'll be trying to identify who broke the operation. Which means if your mother's cover is intact, she has a window," Cora said. "Shun, a backer one, before the organization traces the breach back far enough to identify her." She looked at Hera directly. "I need you to move fast. I need every resource you have pointed at finding her before that window closes." Hara was already reaching for her radio. At 9:30 in the evening, Ethan Decker asked to speak to Cora. He sent the request through Rodriguez, who relayed it to Cora with a look that said he wasn't going to push her either way. She thought about it for less than 30 seconds. "Set it up," she said. They brought Decker to the same conference room where the extended debrief had happened. He was still cuffed, but the posture was different from earlier. The particular rigid control of someone in operational mode had given way to something more human. Something that looked like a person who had made an irreversible decision and was now living in the reality of it. Cora sat across from him, just the two of them with Rodriguez visible through the glass. Decker looked at her for a moment. "The children," he said. "Are they out?" "All six," she said. Something moved through his face that was quick and real and that he didn't try to control. "Good," he said. His voice was rough on the word. "Good. Tell me what you know about the second and third facilities," she said. He looked at her. "I told Rodriguez." "Tell me," she said. "Not the official record. What do you know that you haven't said yet?" He held her gaze. Then he told her. He had been inside the Pacific Northwest facility once 8 months ago. He described it in detail, the structure, the location markers, the road access, the guard configuration. He hadn't given this to Rodriguez because he hadn't been asked for operational detail, only organizational structure. But he gave it to Cora because she was asking the right questions. And because she was Cora. "The third facility," he said, "international. I have a partial location, a region, not coordinates. Eastern Europe, mountainous terrain, small local population built into pre-existing infrastructure that was abandoned after the Cold War." He paused. "Someone with access to the financial records could triangulate from the transaction points. The operational costs of that facility would require local supply chains. It's traceable." "I'll get that to Hera," she said. Decker nodded. A pause. "The photograph," he said. He'd heard. Word moved fast in a contained environment. "Clara Vane, you found her." "Found evidence of her," Cora said. "Not her." She went back in, Decker said, not a question. It looks that way. He absorbed that. She was the one who sent me the information that brought me here tonight, he said. The organizational contact who gave me the access data for this base. I didn't know who it was. I just received the protocol. He paused. 6 months ago, after the 7-year-old, I reached out through a channel I wasn't supposed to know existed. A back channel that the program had used in the early days for compartmentalized communication. I didn't expect anyone to be on the other end. He stopped. Someone responded within 6 hours, gave me a task, told me where to be and when. Cora stared at him. She reached back, she said. She'd been watching me, Decker said, the same way she was watching you, waiting for the moment. He paused. She built the whole thing, Cora. The timing, the positioning, using both of us to create a scenario where the organization couldn't shut it down fast enough. He looked at his hands. She used us, but not the way they used us. She used us because she knew we were the only two people who could pull it off. Cora sat with that, used and not used. The difference between being a weapon that someone pointed and being a person that someone trusted to make the right choices. She knew you'd come over, Cora said. She counted on it. She knew the 7-year-old would break me, Decker said quietly, because she knew me. She was around when they were training us. She saw everything they did and he stopped. She remembered. She knew which of us still had enough of themselves left, that the right moment would be enough. A silence. I need to find her, Cora said. I know, he said. If she's still inside, if the organization is contracting around the breach, she's running out of time. I know, he said again. He looked at her steadily. What do you need from me? The back channel, she said. The one you used to reach out 6 months ago. Can you still access it? He was quiet. If I use it and the organization is monitoring, they might be, she said. Yes. And if they trace it, then we're declaring her position, Cora said, which either gives her a reason to move or she stopped, or it tells them who she is before she can get out. Decker finished. Another silence. Your call, Cora said. I won't make you. Decker looked at her for a long moment. That's the difference, isn't it? He said. Between them and you. She didn't answer. Yes, he said finally. I'll try the channel. At 10:45 in the evening, Rodriguez brought Cora something she hadn't asked for but needed. A full search of the director's physical files had produced it among a great deal of organizational documentation and personnel records. A single sealed envelope. Not electronic. Paper. Physical seal. Handwriting on the outside. The handwriting said foresee when she finds it. Rodriguez handed it to Cora without a word. She looked at the handwriting. She had not seen her mother's handwriting in 3 years. She had a single document, a supply requisition from the facility with a signature at the bottom that she had kept because it was the only physical proof she had that her mother was real and had been real and had touched things in the world. She recognized the handwriting. She stood in the corridor outside the conference room and held the envelope and didn't open it for a full 2 minutes. Rodriguez waited. Holt came out of the children's home and saw her standing there and stopped. She looked at Rodriguez. He shook his head slightly. She moved off quietly. Cora opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten, the same careful, precise handwriting that had managed to be both efficient and somehow warm, the way her mother had always managed to be both efficient and somehow warm. She read it. She read it again. Then she folded it and put it in her jacket pocket with the photograph. Rodriguez waited. She's moving, Cora said. Her voice was controlled and also very clearly the voice of a person controlling something that would otherwise not be controlled. She anticipated the breach being traced back. She has an extraction protocol built in. She'll surface at a specific location within 48 hours under the organization identifying her cover as blown. Where? Rodriguez said. Cora looked at him. She's coming here, she said. Rodriguez blinked. She's coming to Fort Ravenwood, Cora said. She always knew that if the operation worked, Whitaker would be holding the evidence. She built the whole thing around this base being the anchor point. If everything went according to plan, this is where she comes, she paused. 48 hours maximum from the moment the organization figures out who she is. Which could already be happening, Rodriguez said. Which could already be happening, Cora confirmed. Rodriguez was already moving. I need to tell Whitaker. Yes, she said, go. He went. She stood alone in the corridor. She took the letter out of her pocket and read it one more time. It was not a long letter, Her mother had never used more words than necessary. It said that she was sorry for the years, that there was no version of what she had done that was entirely right, including going back in, but that leaving without finishing what she started was also not a version she could live with. That she had watched Cora from a distance for 3 years, and that what she saw had made her certain in a way she hadn't been before. That Cora had become something that the program had not intended and had no framework for, which was proof that the program was wrong about the fundamental thing that people could be permanently defined by what was done to them. And at the end, in smaller writing, as if added after the main letter was complete, I am very proud of you. I have been proud of you since you were 5 years old and you looked at the training room and asked the instructor why. Not how, why. Why no one had ever asked why before. And when they couldn't answer it, you decided the answer was that there wasn't one. And you were right. Cora folded the letter. She stood in the corridor. Her jaw was tight and her eyes were bright, and she was breathing through her nose in a slow, measured rhythm that was not entirely voluntary. Myron came out of the children's room. She had a sandwich in one hand, and she was moving with the careful awareness of someone who had been trained to always know what was around them. But she was also 11 years old, and someone had given her food and a blanket in a room that wasn't a training room. And underneath the awareness, there was something very young trying to figure out what to do with itself. She stopped when she saw Cora. She looked at her. Cora looked back. Marin was smart. She had been trained to read people the same way Cora had been trained to read people at a similar age, and what she was reading on Cora's face right now was something she had the maturity to understand was private. I'm not going to ask, Marin said. I know, Cora said. Is it bad? No, Cora said. It's complicated, but not bad. Marin considered this. Complicated is better than bad, she said. Yes, Cora said. It is. Marin looked at the sandwich. Eli ate 6 of these, she said. Dr. Carver let him. He said Eli could decide when he was full because that was the rule now. Eli's own decision. She said it with the specific wonder of someone for whom this concept was genuinely revolutionary. He didn't know when he was full. He kept asking if it was okay to stop. Cora's chest did the thing it had been doing since the tunnel exit. It'll take time, she said, learning to trust what your own body tells you, when you've always been told what the limits are. Marin looked at her. How long did it take you, she said. Cora thought about it. I'm still learning, she said honestly. Marin nodded slowly, then she held out the sandwich. Do you want half, she said. It was such a simple thing, such a completely ordinary human gesture. The kind of thing that happened in kitchens and cafeterias and schoolyards a million times a day without anyone noticing it. Cora had not had anyone offer to share food with her in 3 years of moving alone. She took half the sandwich. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, Marin said. She said it with the careful formality of someone who had recently learned this exchange existed and was practicing it. But she said it, and it was real, and she went back into the room. Cora stood in the corridor and ate half a sandwich. At 11:30 in the evening, Hera came to find her. The Pacific Northwest facility, she said. We're moving on it at dawn. Based on the detail Decker gave you, we have enough for a federal breach authorization. She paused. The Eastern European location, the financial trace is running. We should have a regional estimate within 6 hours. Good, Cora said. There's something else, Hera said. Her tone changed slightly, still controlled but carrying something different. The 14 names Decker gave us, Hera said. We've been running them since this morning, cross-referencing against the financial records you transferred. She paused. 11 of them confirmed. 3 are still being verified. She paused again. One of the 11 is a current sitting federal official. Cora looked at her. What level, Cora said. Hera told her. The level was high enough that the number of people in the country who held that rank could be counted on one hand. Cora absorbed this. That's why it stayed buried, she said. Yes, Hera said. That's part of why it stayed buried. And now it doesn't stay buried, Hera said. I need you to understand what that means. This goes wide, this goes public eventually, and when it does, every person connected to Black Talon's continuation at every level is exposed. She paused. Including people who may have had peripheral involvement and convinced themselves they didn't really know what it was. This is going to be a very large, very loud, very long process. I know, Cora said. And you're at the center of it, your testimony, your evidence, your identity. Hera looked at her carefully. You're 18 years old and your name is going to be in the middle of one of the largest institutional abuse cases in recent federal history. I know, Cora said again. Are you prepared for that? Cora thought about the 6 children eating sandwiches in the room down the corridor, about Marin asking how long it had taken to learn to trust herself, about Eli in the sky. I walked 14 miles through a blizzard, she said. I've been preparing for 3 years, yes. A pause. I'm prepared. Hara looked at her for a moment. One more thing, she said. The back channel that Decker attempted to use. We monitored the attempt. Cora went still. Was there a response, she said. Not a direct response, Hara said. But there was activity on the channel within 20 minutes of the attempt. A data packet, encrypted to a key that Decker didn't recognize. She paused. But that you might. She held out a printed string of characters, an encryption key. Cora looked at it. Her face did something complicated. The key was built on a specific structure, a pattern she recognized because it was based on something personal, something that only 2 people in the world would have used as a structural foundation for encryption, a specific date, a specific location, the exact coordinates of the facility where Cora had been taken at 5 years old, the place where it started, her mother's key. She sent a packet, Cora said. Yes, Hara said. Do you have the content? Encrypted, Hara said. We need the decryption. Cora looked at the key. She knew the decryption. She knew it because the encryption structure told her what it was, another specific memory, another specific piece of shared history that no one else would have. Give me a terminal, she said. At 12:47 in the morning, the decrypted packet opened. Inside was coordinates, 2 sets, the Pacific Northwest facility, exactly matching what Decker had described, confirming his intelligence, and the Eastern European location, precise GPS coordinates that bypassed the financial trace entirely. And one more thing, a timestamp and a location, 41 hours from now, a specific road junction 40 miles from Fort Ravenwood, and 3 words, bring Marcus, please. Cora stared at the screen for a long time. Whitaker was standing behind her. He had been brought in when she requested the terminal. He had watched the decryption. He had read the coordinates and immediately begun coordinating with Hara on the facility operations. And now he was reading the 3 words. He stood very still. She's asking you to be there, Cora said quietly, at the extraction point. I see that, he said. She trusts you, Cora said. After everything, she built the whole operation around this base around your integrity, and now she's asking you personally to be at the point where she comes in. She paused. That means something. I didn't say anything for a moment. In 30 years, he said slowly, I have never been asked by an operative to be present at their personal extraction. It's not protocol. It's not. He stopped. She's not asking as a professional. She's asking as someone who needs a specific person present. Yes, Cora said. Why me, he said. After all this time, why? Because you never signed anything, Cora said. She knew that. She watched for years to see who was clean and who was complicit and whose conscience was intact. And it was yours. She paused. She needs to come into someone she knows won't look at her the way the organization did, won't see an asset or an operative or a case file. A pause. She needs to come into someone who will see a person. Whitaker stood with the weight of that. He nodded. Then he straightened up. 41 hours, he said. Yes, Cora said. A lot can go wrong in 41 hours, he said. Yes, she said. We keep working, he said. Yes, she said. And they did. The night deepened into the specific dark that comes before the second dawn. In the children's room, Eli was asleep on a cot with an actual pillow. Both hands curled under his cheek, breathing the slow breathing of a child who has been given for the first time in his memory a safe place to sleep. Marin was not asleep. She was sitting on her cot with her knees up and her back against the wall, and she was reading. One of the team members had found a book fiction adventure, a story about a girl who went on a journey through dangerous places and came out the other side. Marin was reading it with the focused intensity of someone who has just discovered that stories exist and is trying to consume them as fast as possible. Dr. Carver sat near the door, not quite sleeping, available if anyone needed him. Holt checked in twice an hour. Kowalski brought more sandwiches at midnight and didn't say anything when 3 of the children, who had seemed asleep, sat up immediately at the sound of the door. Cora moved through the base, Working, reviewing documentation, consulting with Hera on testimony structure, going through the director's files as they came in from the technical team, making herself useful in every way she could identify. At 2:15 in the morning, she stopped in the corridor outside the children's room. She stood there. She listened to the quiet inside, the sound of children breathing, of a cot creaking, of Marin turning a page. She had been moving for so long, moving and preparing and planning and executing and not stopping, because stopping meant the weight of it would catch her, and she wasn't sure she could carry the weight and keep going at the same time. She stood in the corridor. She let the weight catch her. It was heavy, heavier than she had let herself feel in a long time. The years, the training, the 45 minutes with her mother when she was 15, the 3 years alone, the 14 miles, the archive, Ethan's face, the photograph, the letter, bring Marcus, please. She stood there and she felt all of it. She didn't fall. She was surprised dimly that she didn't fall. Maybe the work of 3 years had built something sturdy enough to hold the weight. Maybe the boots Holt had given her were better than the ones she'd walked in on. Maybe there was something in hearing a 6-year-old ask if it was always this big and knowing the answer was yes. She stood in the corridor for 5 minutes. Then she went back to work, because in 41 hours, a road junction 40 miles away, and a woman who had spent 12 years in the dark making sure the light got through. And Cora Vane was not going to let 41 hours go to waste. The 41 hours pass the way hours pass when everything matters too fast and too slow simultaneously each minute, carrying more weight than a minute should reasonably be asked to carry. The Pacific Northwest facility went down at dawn exactly as Hera had planned. 14 federal agents, a military support team, and a federal judge's authorization that had been signed at 3 in the morning. Clean, fast, professional. Rodriguez coordinated from Fort Ravenwood and gave Cora the update when it came through 8 children recovered. 5 facility staff in custody, infrastructure intact for evidence collection. 8 more children. Cora stood at the communications console when the number came through and held it in her chest for a moment. 8 added to 6, 14 children who had spent their entire lives inside walls that someone else built around them, now sitting in rooms where the food wasn't rationed and the lights weren't programmed. 14 children who didn't yet know what the world outside looked like. Who would spend years learning? Who would have hard days and good days and days where the conditioning hit without warning, and days where something small and ordinary felt like a miracle? She knew all of that was coming for them. She knew because it had been coming for her for 3 years and was still arriving in waves. But they were out. That was the thing, they were out. Marin found her at the console 20 minutes later. The 11-year-old had been watching everything with those old young eyes, processing the base and the people and the pace of activity with the kind of systematic attention that would have been remarkable in an adult. In a child, it was the specific kind of remarkable that came with a specific kind of grief attached to it. More, Marin said, nodding at the console. 8 more, Cora said. Marin processed this. Her jaw moved slightly. From another place like ours. Yes. Are they okay? They're out, Cora said. That's the beginning of okay. Marin stood beside her for a moment. Then she said quietly, Eli asked me this morning if we were going to have to go back. Cora looked at her. What did you tell him? I told him no, Marin said. I told him that was done. She paused. Was that right, to say that I didn't want to tell him something that wasn't true? That was right, Cora said. It's true, you're not going back. Marin exhaled a long, controlled release of breath that had probably been held for a very long time. Okay, she said. Good. She went back to her book. At 11 Talon in the morning, 30 hours into the 41, General Whitaker called Cora into his office. He had the financial case laid out on his desk, not the raw data, but a summary that Hera's team had organized overnight. Names, amounts, dates, the structure of how private money had kept a program running for 30 years under government radar. The federal official, he said. Hera's moving on it today. The arrest happens in approximately 4 hours. Does the official know? Cora said. No, nobody outside Hera's direct team, and this room knows the timing. He paused. When it goes public, it goes loud. Every media outlet in the country. Good, Cora said. It's going to be complicated for you, he said. Your name, your testimony, your evidence. The press, general, she said. I walked into a blizzard alone. I think I can handle the press. He looked at her for a moment. Then he almost smiled. First time she'd seen that. Fair point, he said, a silence. 41 hours is almost up, he said. 30 hours, she corrected. We leave in 8. Are you ready? She looked at the desk, at the names, at the documented weight of what had been done and what it had taken to surface it. I've been ready since I was 15, she said. I just didn't know it yet. Whitaker nodded slowly. Then carefully, whatever happens at that junction, whatever state she's in when she comes through, you need to be prepared for the fact that 12 years inside a private intelligence operation leaves marks. I know, Cora said. She may not be exactly who you remember. General, Cora said. I am not exactly who she remembers either. A pause. That's okay. We have a time now. We didn't before. We do now. At 3:47 in the afternoon, the federal arrest went public. The name broke across every major news network simultaneously. The specific official, the specific charges, the connection to a private program operating black site facilities within the United States. Fort Ravenwood's communications room, which had been running at intensity for 2 days straight, went up another level. Calls from press offices, from congressional liaisons, from agencies that were now scrambling to either associate themselves with the exposure or distance themselves from the history, depending on which was safer. Whitaker handled the official traffic. Hara handled the federal narrative. Cora watched the news cycle begin to move and felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not relief, accountability. The specific feeling of something long overdue arriving. Rodriguez found her watching the broadcast. He stood beside her for a moment. 14 names, he said, 11 confirmed, 3 being verified, 1 arrested, the rest coming. He paused. This is what 3 years of your work looks like when it lands. She looked at the screen. It's a beginning, she said, not an ending. Yeah, he said, but it's a hell of a beginning. Kowalski came and found her an hour later. He had Eli with him. The 6-year-old had decided, apparently through a process of his own evaluation, that Kowalski was trustworthy enough to stay close to and had been following him around the base for most of the day with the focused loyalty of someone who had chosen an anchor and was holding to it. He wants to know what all the noise is, Kowalski said. Eli looked at Cora. Why are the loud people on the screen angry? Cora crouched down to his level. They're not angry, she said. They're surprised. Something that was hidden for a very long time just came into the light, and some people are surprised by that. Eli considered this. Is the thing that came out good or bad? The truth coming out is always good, she said, even when the truth is hard. He looked at the screen, looked back at her. Okay, he said, with that complete and absolute acceptance that she had started to understand was not naivety, but was something else, a child's specific capacity for deciding what matters and what doesn't. He went back to following Kowalski. Cora watched him go. Holt appeared at her shoulder. One of the best things I've ever seen, she said quietly, watching Eli navigate the corridor with absolute seriousness. That kid. All of them, Cora said. All of them, Holt agreed. The vehicles left Fort Ravenwood at 11:00 at night. 2 SUVs. Whitaker, Rodriguez, Holt. 2 federal agents from Harris' team and Cora, armed, alert. Moving in the specific silence of people who understand that the last mile of a long operation is not the place to start relaxing. The road junction was exactly where the coordinates placed it. Mountain Junction winter night, the kind of absolute quiet that only exists in places far enough from cities that the world's noise doesn't reach. They waited. Cora stood outside the vehicle. She couldn't sit. She had been trained in patience and she had executed on it for years, and right now patience was the one thing her body was refusing to give her. Whitaker stood near her, gave her space. The first 10 minutes passed, then 15. Rodriguez checked communications. Nothing unusual. 20 minutes. Cora breathed, slow, steady, everything she had. Then headlights, 1 vehicle, moving carefully, stopping 30 feet from the waiting convoy. A door opened, a figure stepped out, dark hair with gray in it now. The posture she had memorized at 5 years old and had carried in her body for 13 years as the physical memory of someone she thought she might never see again. Clara Vane walked into the headlights. She was thinner. The years had changed her face in ways that time and sustained pressure change faces. She moved with the same controlled precision. But there was something different in it now. Something that carried a long exhaustion, and also underneath that, something that looked like a weight being set down. She looked at Whitaker first. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she looked at Cora. Cora was standing 15 feet away. She had not moved since the car door opened. Every muscle in her body was completely still, in the specific way that happens when a person is holding together the entirety of themselves by pure will. Clara took one step. Cora closed the 15 feet. They stood face to face for the first second. Then Clara Vane put her arms around her daughter, and Cora stood there for exactly 1 second, doing nothing before something that had been held for 3 years, for 13 years, released all at once. She held on. Clara held on. Whitaker looked away. Holt turned her face to the dark. Rodriguez made a sound and covered it with a cough that fooled no one. They stood there for a long time, the cold and the dark and the mountain silence around them, and these two people who had found each other on the far side of something that had tried its hardest to make sure they never would. When they finally separated, Cora's face was wet, and she didn't try to hide it. Clara's jaw was working and her eyes were bright, and she was clearly fighting something that she had been fighting for years and was finally allowing herself to stop fighting. "I got your letter," Cora said. Clara looked at her. "I know you did. You came." "I would have come anyway," Cora said. "You didn't need to write it." "I needed to write it," Clara said. "I've needed to write it for 3 years," she paused. "For 13. A silence. "The children," Clara said. "Are they safe?" 14 out, Cora said. "The third facility, the Eastern European Coordinates you sent Hera, has a federal cooperation request running through international channels. It's going to take longer, but it will happen." Clara did. Something settled in her face, something that had been held at a specific tension finally releasing. "The official," she said, "arrested this afternoon," Cora said. "Live on every network." Clara closed her eyes for one moment, just one, then opened them. "The other 13 names." "In process," Cora said. "It's moving. It's not stopping." Clara looked at her daughter, really looked at her, reading her the same way Cora read rooms, with that specific deep attention that saw past the surface into the structure underneath. "You built all of this," Clara said quietly. "From what I gave you in 45 minutes when you were 15. You built the foundation," Cora said. "I built on top of it. You walked 14 miles through a blizzard." "I learned patience from you," Cora said. Something in Clara's expression broke open in a way that was different from crying. Older than crying. The particular break of a person who has survived something enormous and has not allowed themselves to fully feel that they survived until this exact moment. Whitaker stepped forward. Clara looked at him. "Marcus," she said. "Clara," he said. A silence that held 30 years in it. "Thank you," she said, "for receiving her." "She didn't give me a lot of choice," he said. Clara almost smiled. "No, she wouldn't." "You trained her well," he said. "I gave her a foundation," Clara said. "Everything else she built herself." She paused. That's the part they never understood. You can't build a weapon that thinks, because the moment it thinks, it chooses, and the moment it chooses, it's not a weapon anymore. She looked at Cora. "It's a person." Cora stood in the cold mountain dark and held her mother's gaze and felt the full weight of everything that had led to this moment. Every mile, every year, every decision to keep moving when stopping would have been so much easier. Then Whitaker said, "We need to move. Hera wants Clara in for a full debrief as soon as possible. We have a window before the organization's remaining structure has time to adapt." Clara nodded. "I know, I have everything. Names, locations, operational records going back 8 years. Internal communications, financial flows, personnel files." She paused. "I've been building it for years. It's complete." "Then let's finish this," Whitaker said. They moved toward the vehicles. Cora walked beside her mother, their shoulders close. Not touching, but close in the way of two people relearning the geography of each other after a long absence. "The children," Cora said, "the 6 from the northern facility, the 8 from the Pacific Northwest, they're going to need support, real support. Not institutional processing, actual human support for years." "I know," Clara said. "I'm going to fight for that," Cora said. "After the testimony, after the federal cases, after all of it, I'm going to fight for what happens to them next. Someone has to." "Someone should have fought for you," Clara said quietly. The exact words from the letter. Someone did, Cora said. You did, in the only way you could, as she paused. Now we both fight together. Clara looked at her daughter walking beside her in the dark, this 18-year-old who had walked 14 miles through a killing storm because there was something that needed doing, and she was the person who could do it, who had stood in an interrogation room and talked circles around trained officers, who had looked Ethan Decker in the eyes and asked him to choose. Yes, Clara said, together. They reached the vehicle. Cora stopped at the door. She looked at the sky tuning. The same sky that Eli had seen for the first time from a tunnel exit and had asked, is it always this big? It was. It was always this big. It had been this big the whole time she was inside, the whole time she was running, the whole time she was building alone in the years between 15 and now. The sky had been there the entire time, enormous and indifferent and present, waiting for the moment when she could stop and actually look at it. She looked at it now. She breathed. Then she got in the vehicle. The door closed. They drove back toward Fort Ravenwood, toward the 14 children and the federal case and the testimony and the long necessary difficult work of making sure that what had been done was documented, prosecuted, and made impossible to repeat. Cora Vaney was 18 years old. She had walked 14 miles through a blizzard with no gear and no backup and nothing but 3 years of preparation and the absolute conviction that the people in those facilities deserve someone to come. She had walked in as a girl they laughed at. She was leaving as the person who had broken open something that governments had spent 30 years burying. Not a weapon, not a project, not a symbol. A person who had looked at everything that had been done to her and decided that the only answer worth giving was this: I choose what I become, and I become someone who fights for the ones who cannot fight yet. She had made that choice at 15. She made it again at 18. She would make it again tomorrow and the day after and every day for as long as there was work left to do. And there was work left to do.